Good morning, everyone. We're going to call this meeting of the TRPA Governing Board to order. It is Wednesday, October 22nd, and it is 10:29 a.m. The first item on the agenda is a roll call to determine quorum. Maria, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Alding?
Here.
Mr. Aguilar?
Here.
Mr. Bass?
Here.
Ms. Conrad Seda?
Here.
Ms. Faustinos?
Here.
Ms. Gustafson?
Here.
Ms. Hayes?
Here.
Ms. Hill? Mr. Henigman?
Here.
Mr. Keykeper?
Here.
Ms. Lane? Ms. Loomer?
Here.
Mr. Rice?
Here.
Mr. Settlemeyer? Ms. Williamson?
Here.
Okay, Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. To board members, we will do the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we have a time certain for administrative matters, which is our Lake Spirit Awards. So we'll do the pledge, Lake Spirit Awards, and then public comment and start our agenda. So if everyone could please join me in standing for the pledge. Great, thank you. And if I could turn it over then please for our time certain at 10:30 for Lake Spirit Awards to staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, governing board members, TRPA staff, and members of the public. I'm Thea Schwartz, Communications Specialist for TRPA, Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, and it's my distinct pleasure today to announce the 2025 Lake Spirit Awards. As we all know, Lake Tahoe is a unique jewel that requires diligence and passion to protect. Chances are we can all think of someone who makes Tahoe their personal or professional priority. Here at TRPA, we wanted to celebrate that passion. Established in 2011, the Lake Spirit Awards honors individuals who embody that spirit. Nominated by their peers, each winner inspires and leads in environmental stewardship, often behind the scenes. This makes them the unsung heroes of the lake until now. Today, we are proud to celebrate 5 individuals for their extraordinary commitment to protecting Lake Tahoe. Each honoree will receive a commemorative plaque and, of course, unlimited bragging rights. Some are here with us in this room today. So there are 3 categories, as you see on the slide. First up, in the agency representative category, next slide, please. We're pleased to recognize Kirsten Gwynn. As Director of Marketing for the North Tahoe Community Alliance, Kirsten Gwynn has led innovative campaigns that champion stewardship, support local businesses, and protect the Lake and Tahoe environment. She also drives communications for the Destination Stewardship Council, guiding efforts that educate visitors on how to be good neighbors and responsible guests. Beyond her professional work, Kirsten is deeply involved in the North Lake Tahoe community, volunteering with youth sports and local initiatives. Her passion for her people and the lake reflects a steadfast commitment to balancing visitation, community well-being, and environmental preservation. Congrats, Kirsten. Next slide, please. Next up, we have Tom Burnt. Tom Burnt's in this room today. Would you like to join me, Tom?
Buddy.
Recognized by his peers as a dedicated Tahoe steward, Tom Burnt has been instrumental in advancing the roving inspector program within the Lake Tahoe Aquatic Invasive Species Program. Implemented in partnership between the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency and the Tahoe Resource Conservation District, the program places friendly inspectors around Tahoe's shoreline to raise awareness about the serious threat aquatic invasive species pose to Lake Tahoe's ecosystem. By educating beachgoers and non-motorized paddlers on how to clean, drain, and dry their watercraft and equipment, Tom is helping promote the most effective way to prevent the spread of invasives, like the recently discovered golden mussel. As lead roving inspector, his expertise, enthusiasm, and ability to connect with community have strengthened public trust and inspired collective action to protect Tahoe's watershed. Tom, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I just want to say thank you to everybody, not just for sharing the same dreams I have, but participating in such a wonderful community and outdoors. I don't have a whole lot prepared to say, so I just want to give the warmest thank you. And let's just keep going on this beautiful journey.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yep.
Next slide, please. We have the citizen category next. So first up, I'd love to recognize Sydney Morrow. As Glenbrook HOA Director and Firewise Coordinator, Sydney Morrow has shown exceptional leadership in protecting Lake Tahoe from wildfire risk. She has led a large-scale tree thinning project that has removed roughly 450 hazardous trees on Tahoe's east shore, reducing wildfire danger and strengthening community resilience. And earlier this year, Sydney helped organize a national lieutenant governor's conference to demonstrate the effectiveness of the burn bot, which utilizes technology for wildfire fuels mitigation. It shined a light on Tahoe as a national model, mobilizing technology and collaboration for effective fire preparedness. Her collaborative spirit, persistence, and foresight have set an example for how local action can protect both neighborhoods and Tahoe's environment. On the next slide, Sydney has sent us a little message we can play here today.
I'm really sorry that I can't be with you today. Travel took me other places, but I do want to thank you for sponsoring awards like this Lake Spirit Award, particularly to recognize residents at the lake that are doing lots of things to make Lake Tahoe safe and healthy. I'd also like to really send my thanks to the Tahoe Douglas Fire Protection District. They've been instrumental in getting our programs off the ground and making them successful. I'd also like to thank the Tahoe Fund for nominating me for this award. It really means a lot to me to be here today. I really represent all the basins all the communities in the basins that are doing everything they can to make the lake safer and better. And I just would like to finish by telling everybody, you know, we can all do something to make Lake Tahoe better. All we have to do is start. So thank you very much.
So thanks for that. Sydney did say at the end, we can all do something that helps protect Lake Tahoe. All we have to do is start. And she did thank the Douglas County Fire Protection District, and Tahoe Fund was her nominator. So a really warm thank you from Sydney. She's traveling right now and couldn't be here with us today. So next slide. Our next citizen awardee is Tim Kosher, nominated by Tim. Why don't you join me up here? Tim's here today. Nominated by numerous peers, Tim Kosher is recognized for his outstanding commitment to Lake Tahoe and surrounding communities. Through his involvement with the UC Davis Tahoe Environmental Research Center, Sierra Watershed Education Partnerships, and the Tahoe Institute for Natural Science, he has spent over a decade inspiring curiosity and fostering a love of science in the next generation of Tahoe stewards. Peers describe Tim's passion as contagious, his energy as tireless, and his leadership as truly inspiring, qualities that make him a deserving recipient of the Lake Spirit Award. Congratulations, Tim. Would you like to say a word?
So I was smart enough to marry a woman that grew up in Palo Alto and has come here all her life. So I've been coming here for the last 43 years, moved up here in 2009. And fortunately retired. And so I've been volunteering and had the opportunity to work with some tremendous nonprofits and enjoy time with, I would say I borrow other people's children because I'd have a lot of time educating them. So it's been terrific. I'm very humbled to receive this award. Thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Did it work?
Thank you so much. All right. Next slide, please. All right, and lastly, but certainly not least, is our Lifetime Achievement. Our Lifetime Achievement Award goes to Jim Beachy. So Jim Beachy's leadership has left an enduring mark on Lake Tahoe. Having served as former executive director of the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency from 1994 to 2002, his lifelong dedication is deeply woven into the health of the lake. It was under Jim's leadership that TRPA spearheaded the ban on carbureted two-stroke boat engines, cutting polluting gasoline compounds in the water by 90%. That's a landmark achievement for water quality. And Jim was also the visionary of the Lake Tahoe Environmental Improvement Program, laying the foundation for decades of collaborative restoration, surpassing more than $3 billion in investments to date. The EIP is now heralded as one of the most successful landscape scale public-private conservation initiatives in the United States. His vision, integrity, and unwavering dedication will continue to shape the Tahoe Basin far into the future. Let's give a round of applause for Jim Beachy, who could not be here today.
Thank you, everyone. Julie Reagan here, TRPA's Executive Director. First of all, this is Thea's first presentation to the governing board. Isn't she doing an amazing job? Thank you. She did a wonderful job coordinating these awards. But I'm sure there are many of you on the board who have served in one capacity or another with Jim Beachy. I wanted just to say, as your executive director, how much he has inspired me. I think Jim may be able to listen in or see this video after the fact. You know, Jim not only was our executive director at a very tumultuous time in TRPA's history in the late 90s. He served for 7 years, which is right up there in the top achievement of any tenure of an executive director, which tends to go about 3 to 5 years because it is, I can attest, a challenging position. You know, but Jim focused the agency in a way that was very visionary. It was really his first vision to have a path, a bikeway around the whole lake. And so we're halfway done to achieving that vision of a fully off-road path encircling the lake. And it was such a big dream at the time that it was coming on board. The first summit, which has put Tahoe on the trajectory of now achieving, as Thea said in those remarks, $3 billion of investment from the federal government, the state of California, Nevada, our local government jurisdictions, the private sector, the Washoe tribe, you know, $3 billion in less than 30 years to go toward environmental restoration. He was the one, I think, Member Gustafson always would hold up his line. The project is the fix. Rules on paper don't enforce themselves. We have to have enforcement. We have to have regulations, but we also have to retrofit and go back and restore things that were done before we had environmental regulations in place. Then Jim served for many, many years as our hearings officer at TRPA. The hearings officer is an unsung hero as well of the agency. It's a step of review between staff level issue permits and the board. And Jim served in that capacity for many years. So his visionary leadership, I think, is embedded in the DNA of collaboration and this new EPIC collaborative framework that we operate under in TRPA through our regional plan. And I'm just really proud to say a few words. And we understand Jim couldn't be here, but sending him great affection from the podium. So just wanted to say a few words. Thank you, Thea.
Thank you, Julie. So congratulations to these outstanding recipients, and thank you for your dedication to Lake Tahoe. Let's give one more round of applause. We also want to acknowledge the family and fans for taking the time out of your day to be here. And a huge thank you to all who submitted nominations. There were so many wonderful submissions, which made it very, very difficult for us to choose winners. And so looking ahead, the next Lake Spirit Awards will take place in 2027. And in the spirit of continued celebration, nominations are now open for the Best in Basin Awards. I encourage you to nominate a project that stands out for its innovation, impact, or leadership in protecting Lake Tahoe. More info can be found at trpa.gov/awards. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you all so much and congratulations again. We are now on agenda item 3, which is our public comment period for any items listed on the agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per speaker. This period is for any item again that's listed on the agenda. First, we'll take members of the public in the room, and then we'll go on to online. If you're online, you can either click the raise hand button in Zoom or dial *9 if you're calling in on the phone. And if people are in the audience right now that have public comment for the board, I invite you up at this time to the podium.
Good morning. Excuse me. Good morning. Gavin Feiger, Policy Director at Lead to Save Lake Tahoe. This commenting on the Cultivating Communities agenda item today. Start off by thanking staff and the board members that have been through all the meetings for the Tahoe Living Working Group and the community meetings. I think staff has done a really good job listening to all the different local jurisdictions, to community members, all of which have different priorities, different wants and desires. And the policy proposals you had in your packet today or have in your packet today do a really good job reflecting all that and sometimes disparate input. So just really high level for Keep Tahoe Blue, coverage and development rights give us heartache. You've heard us say this 100 times over the decades. And coverage in particular, we have the soils threshold. It's hard to imagine a world in which that threshold could be achieved and maintained without the coverage restrictions staying in place as they are today. There may be some room, as in phase 2, for looking to look at how stormwater is treated from projects, area-wide stormwater systems. Some enhanced coverage if BMPs are somehow enforced, or on-site treatment, the maintenance of those systems is somehow enforced. That's a nut that's never been cracked in all the years. So, as of now, we're just not in favor of changing coverage requirements. We don't see how we could continue to achieve and maintain our soils threshold by doing so. Development rights, I think there are some creative solutions I've heard. The growth cap, of course, has to remain intact. I think that'll come out in the environmental impact statement that's being prepared. So I think we submitted the letter a little bit late yesterday, but if you have a chance to glance through that, it's pretty short, and I bolded out some of our high-level positions right now. But thanks for the time, and should be a good discussion today.
Thanks, Kevin. Anyone else in the room wishing to make public comment at this time, please come forward.
Boom. Good morning, members of the governing board, everyone else present. My name is John Grigsby. I'm a 15-year resident of State Line. I prefer to assume that everyone is acting in good faith and help us to reach solutions that benefit everyone. My extensive work of the Mountainside Plan is perhaps proof of this, so I take no pleasure in informing you of the following. Speak to item 4 of the consent calendar. The staff report in question, Resolution of Enforcement Action Barton Healthcare System, is based on, unfortunately, materially and provably false statements by Barton representatives, which the legal committee has unfortunately accepted uncritically, and which could thus expose the TRPA to future liability. You should not accept them, and item 4 should be removed from consent. The narrative in the staff report is that Barton originally complied with their interim BMPs approved 6/11/24, but that the TRPA came to Barton later in the year and asked for additional work, which wasn't negotiated or completed in time, causing several smaller muddy discharges and the massive one beginning 1/31/25. So the whole thing's kind of an accident. And this narrative was repeated explicitly at the committee meeting. Unfortunately, this narrative is provably false. The photographs I submitted with my public comment, which were taken on 2/1/25, show that Barton performed none of the grading required by the interim BMP. Specifically, they did not grade the lot to the slopes and contours shown on C4 and C5. They did not add the retention berms. They did not add the flood control wattles. And this was not an accident or an innocent misunderstanding. They simply refused to do the work. And furthermore, my photographs show that Barton instead dug a giant unpermitted drainage pit in summer 2024, drained the site, and then compacted it to 82%, 92% directly against the approved interim BMPs, and with no permits to do so. This compaction and the lack of grading caused the muddy runoff events. In summary, this was not an innocent misunderstanding. Barton did not do the work required there by their interim BMPs, causing the discharges. They did unpermitted work instead that made the discharges worse. And the staff report uncritically accepts materially false statements from Barton representatives. This not only makes a joke of the BMP process, showing the world that we should all ignore the TRPA entirely and simply pay a perfunctory fine afterwards that costs a lot less than compliance with the BMPs would have. It potentially exposes the TRPA to future liability. Accordingly, item 4 should be removed from consent. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Other members of the public?
Good morning, Ellie Waller. I have no disrespect for the legal committee and how they run their meetings. I am struggling trying to understand the definition of routine issues on consent. I'm asking that you pull consent item number 4. I agree with most of the comments that Mr. Grigsby did. It's a violation fee of $50K. There was approximately 120 pages of public comment provided. I don't think that's very routine. I also don't think that the legal committee had a very robust discussion with the public. I'm sure there's been plenty of discussion with staff. I also contacted the Douglas County manager this morning to make sure that I don't misquote. Douglas County takes no position on the $50K. They welcome any contributions toward the maintenance of the infiltration site. They did not say one way or another if that is enough for that site. I believe if you do a project, and we've had issues in the past with maintenance and operational effectivities, that was in one of my comments. Obviously, most of you have read my comments. I've taken a lot of time and effort to present issues like fencing. Thank you, Ms. Aldine, for bringing up a portion of the fencing, but there's derelict fencing. I provided photographic evidence. Why is it still sitting there? That is not a good best management practice. I don't think the fine aligns with past issues that have been brought forward through another one of my comments where there could have been incremental fines. So the $50K could have added up to something more significant. Don't know how that's going to be handled in the future. I would also like to see some breakdown evidence of the $1 million that was quoted by the attorney of BMP activity that's taken place on the site. Something that just really shows activities have been going on. Maybe it could be posted on the major projects site. I urge you, and hopefully that you did read the comments, to pull this for further discussion. I'll just say you can't cover up mistakes of the past, literally. Thank you.
Other public comments?
Planning manager, good morning. I actually just had a question. Will you be taking public comment when the cultivating community agenda item comes up later?
That's right now. You're at the right time.
All right. Okay. Well, let me reintroduce myself, John Hitchcock, planning manager, City South Lake Tahoe. Today, we'd like to express the city's support for the policy updates to the TRPA Code of Ordinance through the cultivating community planning process. We hope that staff found our input in the process meaningful and will lead to increased opportunities of housing of all types. The input that we provided, some of it was directed from our city council direction, and other also real world examples as the city implements projects on behalf of TRPA in the MOU. Most of the barriers that we discovered related primarily to coverage, development rights transfers, mitigation fees, and design and density standards. For example, we encourage TRPA to relook at the density standards for mixed-use development. Currently is the way that is currently structured. If you add a residential component to a commercial project, your density is automatically reduced in half in size. That particular standard doesn't apply in area plans, but does apply outside area plans. Other examples that we encourage TRPA to look at is transfer development rights to properties that have legal conforming development on sensitive lands. Under today's TRPA code, you literally can tear down development on sensitive land and rebuild it as is in its current location. However, if you want to add a new residential use to it, for example, you want to build an ADU, you're restricted from doing so because you're increasing BMTs, even though you're not having an impact on coverage. You're not creating new coverage. All you're doing is rebuilding on the existing coverage. Example I can give you, we worked with this one individual who had existing one-story garage. She wanted to build a two-story garage and put an ADU on top. However, she was not able to do that because her parcel was identified as a stream environment zone. However, what she could do is she could do in not accessory living facility, but an accessory living facility without a kitchen. The city doesn't see any distinction between the two, between accessory living facility and an ADU. So we encourage TRPA to kind of take a look at that. If there's no impact on coverage, you should let an ADU be built. Another example for us is a Chevy site. That is also identified as a stream environment zone. That particular parcel has sat vacant for many years. We're trying to get it redeveloped. However, it's been very difficult, and most developers have told us it's not feasible to do so, especially if they're interested in redeveloping the site as a mixed-use project. If they were interested in transferring residential units as part of their commercial project, they would be required to retire 1,200 square feet per residential unit that's transferred in. Assuming you can transfer 20 units on that particular parcel, you basically would have to restore half the site, and that makes the project infeasible.
Thank you. And John, this is a really important discussion. I don't want you to feel rushed or cut short. Can we enter your written comments as public comments so we have them as well?
Yes.
And then thank you for being here. And I know discussions will continue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other members of the public?
Hello, members of the board and TRPA. This is not on the agenda item. I was hoping to have a little leeway as I have to be on duty this afternoon. I didn't realize that the procedures have been changed to the end of the meeting. So this will be brief.
Go ahead.
I'm here to request a reevaluation of my incorrectly scored lot based on factual information, documentation, and expert data that I've already submitted to TRPA. The information I provided, including professional topographic surveys, engineering data, and verifiable records, clearly demonstrate that the original scoring of my property was flawed and does not accurately reflect its true environmental conditions. I want to be clear that the fees that I paid to TRPA are not viewed as a loss, but as an investment in my property and in the pursuit of a fair and accurate review. However, TRPA's current policies appear structured in a way that removes accountability for previous errors. The agency is not disputing the facts I've presented, only denying my request based on internal policy, which is blatantly unfair and inconsistent with TRPA's mission to ensure equitable and scientifically sound decision-making. During this process, I was informed that my lot would not be reevaluated based on TRPA's policy concerning Placer County's sliver lots. These parcels are located more than 20 miles away from my property in South Lake Tahoe and have no physical, hydrological, or environmental relevance or relation to my site. How can such distant and unrelated lots be used as justification in this equation? This reasoning lacks logic, fairness, and scientific relevance in the specific characteristics of my property. Furthermore, TRPA's legal counsel publicly stated that the factual information and data I provided were manufactured This statement is both false and defamatory. My findings are supported by multiple credentialed experts, including surveyors, engineers, and field professionals whose work and reputations validate the legitimacy of my evidence. Furthermore, TRPA, lastly, I must note that the inconsistency that if I were to combine my existing parcel numbers, TRPA regulations would permit the construction of a single family dwelling unit on the same property. This contradiction further underscores a need for a fair reevaluation. In light of the substantial evidence and clear errors in the original assessment, I respectfully request that TRPA rescore my lot, taking into account all the verified facts, expert testimony, and documented improvements already presented. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Are there members of the public? Okay. Seeing none, can we please check online to see if we have hands raised or *9 dialed?
Thank you, Madam Chair. 7 hands up online. The first hand raised is Ann Nichols. Ann, please unmute to make your comment.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Governing board members, thank you for this opportunity. I'm talking about cultivating community policy package. Renaming phase 3 as cultivating community is confusing and misleading. We've already gone through phase 1 and 2. Changing the name midstream suggests this is a new initiative when it is actually the continuation of a single multi-phase housing deregulation effort. The segmentation of these policy changes is inappropriate and warrants a single basin-wide environmental impact statement and analyzing the cumulative effects of phases 1 to 3 together. Let's also remember that phase 2 was sold to us on the guarantee that increased height, density, and coverage would remain within existing town centers. Now TRPA proposes expanding these boundaries and extending the same incentives to non-deed restricted market rate projects. That breaks faith with the public. Phases 1 to 3 were all justified on the promise of incentivized deed restricted affordable housing. To now shift those incentives to market rate multifamily development is hypocrisy. Besides the fact that achievable housing cannot be financed and allows people 30-hour work week. I mean, who's going to verify that? Meanwhile, key community priorities, especially short-term rental regulation, have been ignored. There's many options to explore sustainable funding sources from luxury home transfer tax or a targeted transient occupancy tax. Finally, proposals to exempt ADUs or certain projects from development rights, land coverage, or environmental review would further erode the integrity of TRPA's growth management system and its credibility to the public. Streamlining review while expanding town centers is not environmental protection, it's regulatory abandonment. We have been complaining for years about there's no cap on the conversions of CFA to TAUs or vice versa. And there is millions of square feet of CFA, you know, and you say there's a cap on development. I don't know how, I'd love to know how you do that. In short, TRPA must restore transparency, conduct a single EIS for all housing phases, and return to its mission of protecting the environment and serving Tahoe's year-round residents, not developers. Thank you.
Next hand up is Alan Miller. Alan, please unmute to make your comment.
Hello, Alan Miller, civil and environmental engineer. And I have a 25-year regulatory background and including enforcement with the California Regional Water Quality Control Board. And I wanted to comment on item number 4 that's on the consent and say that I agree with the persons who spoke about it shouldn't be on the consent calendar. I think there should be an open public hearing about it. And I don't agree with certain comments that were made by your chief counsel about because of the manner of enforcement being through the courts that they have to prevent disclosure of information to the public concerning the nature, extent, and magnitude of the potential fines associated with the violations and the number of violations and so forth. And that's, he said it's because, well, we don't have the administrative powers to just assign fines, so we have to do these settlements and all this kind of stuff. And I just think that when I worked for the water board, we had to lay all our cards on the table, and we had to be willing to defend our actions before the board, knowing that it ultimately was final and it could end up in court. And so if we weren't prepared to go to court with it, we probably weren't on very justifiable grounds. And so I'm not suggesting that certain things can't be kept confidential, settlement negotiations being part of that. But, you know, even the settlements have to come forward publicly as here. But there needs to be a lot more detail. There needs to be a lot more information disclosed. You're the public servants. You're not working on behalf of just the developing community here. And so that's the essence of my my comment. And so I suggest not to do this on consent or to bring it back at another time, because I think the magnitude of the fines are substantially underestimated. I don't know that, he said, I don't know how far back you went in looking at previous fines that had been issued for similar violations. And if that was under Marshall and Marchetta, I don't have any good feeling about that. So that's my comment today. Thank you.
Next hand raised is Rob Olson. Rob, please unmute to make your comment.
Hello. I'm Rob Olson, and I'm here to express my strong support for item 9, the proposed policy package, cultivating community, conserving the basin. As a member of the Tahoe Living Working Group, as the contractor's representative, I believe this package has the potential to significantly increase the number of workforce housing units in our community while improving the environment. While I support the entire package, I would say we keep looking at all options. I particularly endorse the following proposals. Scaling development rights. I believe this approach will allow planned density to reach capacity more efficiently and thoughtfully without increasing overall planned density. Accessory dwelling units. I agree that ADUs as accessories should not require residential units of use. Development rights consistent with other accessories in the TRPA code. Additionally, I support decreasing coverage requirements for ADUs. Lower and deferred fees. Lowering fees and deferring them until final inspection would provide a crucial financial runway for projects. I also suggest immediately deferring fees on all workforce housing projects until this policy packet is finalized. This would encourage current projects, such as ourselves with 30-unit project ready to break ground next year, to move forward with projects this upcoming building season. Knowing that they could benefit from any fee adjustment made before final inspection would help projects such as this. Rethinking land coverage. Providing the public with more options to protect the environment while allowing for the highest and best use of land is an excellent incentive. Adjusting development standards and town center boundaries. While not suggesting all areas become town centers, expanding these boundaries could create more opportunities for workforce housing. Securing subsidy funding. I advocate for securing subsidy funding for workforce housing, potentially through transfer tax or through fees on short-term rentals that are currently applied to other commercial projects. Equitable application of these fees could generate substantial funds to support workforce housing construction. Thank you for your efforts in moving these important initiatives forward. as quickly as possible. Best of luck.
The next hand raised is Laura Patton. Laura, please unmute to make your comment.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair, members of the board. Laura Patton, Natural Resource Director, speaking on behalf of the League to Save Lake Tahoe. I'm giving comment on the threshold agenda item. Environmental thresholds, as you all know, is really at the heart of TRPA's mandate under the Bi-State Compact. There's scientific and policy foundations really for protecting Lake Tahoe's unique environment and grounding all of the regional decisions. We appreciate the thoughtful science-based work that TRPA and its partners have put into updating the forest health and water quality thresholds, standards that really must be achieved and maintained. These updates are essential to ensuring Tahoe's management framework reflects the realities of today's environmental challenges, from climate change and wildfire to aquatic invasive species impacts. We continue to encourage TRPA to really build on this progress by updating all of the environmental thresholds before the next threshold evaluation. Modern, relevant standards across every resource area are critical for effective adaptive management and for protecting the environmental, water quality, and resilience of the Tahoe Basin to keep Tahoe blue. We strongly support a comprehensive basin-wide threshold update process that's grounded in the best available science, transparent methods, and community input as well. We'll continue to support this important work as the threshold update process really moves forward. Thanks again for your continued leadership in advancing Tahoe's environmental protection framework.
Next hand raised is Melissa Soderston. Melissa, please unmute to make your comment.
Yes, good morning. Melissa Soderston, South Lake Tahoe. I'm here to speak on item 9B, specifically the forest health and watershed part. What we're seeing right now is not forest health, and it is certainly not providing any wildfire protection for us. And I encourage all of you to actually go out and tour these sites on a regular basis, see what they look like as time goes on. In particular, the ones that are occurring on the South Shore, which I'm most familiar with. The trees that are being removed are the largest and most fire resilient of our trees. We are seeing incredible drying of the ecosystems. This burn bot project that we are seeing currently on the South Shore has left enormous amounts of slash. It left trees and shrubs that were just ripped out, a foot high of debris and slash, plenty of places for embers to land. We do know that the climate is rapidly changing, and the only thing that we can be guaranteed is that it is going to continue to change and that there is nothing that we can do to stop what is going to happen. We really need to focus on what we can control, which is our built environment. These forest thinning and forest health projects are not doing what they purport. They are giving a false sense of security, so people are not doing their proper defensible space work. We hear it constantly that they don't need to do the work on their home because it's happening out in the forest to protect them. We need to get all of the funding away from these massive landscape scale projects and focus on the built environment. We are not seeing any thinning occurring along our evacuation routes. We're not seeing it happen adjacent to our communities. We are just seeing entire ecosystems devastated at the same time that our bears are being slaughtered for simply trying to find alternative food sources as we are destroying all of theirs. Please go out there and look at these projects. They are not leaving anything left for wildlife to eat at the very time of year that they are trying to forage and store all of their food for winter. It's egregious. It's disgusting. I don't think that any of you are seeing what's happening. I think you're taking the word of, what agencies are telling you, and you really need to get your boots on the ground and see what is happening. See the size of these trees, see the amount of slash that's being left behind, and recognize that it is not going to stop a wind-driven fire. There is an enormous amount of peer-reviewed evidence out there, not coming from the Forest Service, that shows that none of this works. We saw it in Lahaina, we saw it in Los Angeles, Texas, Colorado, continuously over and over again. We are patting ourselves on the back for the good that we're doing for the environment while we're watching it be destroyed. Please get out and see what's happening. Stop funding the destruction of our environment and focus on the built environment, which we can control. Do not increase coverage, because allowing people to share coverage elsewhere does nothing to improve the flow of water on my property. Thanks.
Next hand up is Toby Tyler. Toby, please unmute to make your comment.
Yeah, Toby Tyler, retired environmental engineer, speaking on behalf of Sierra Club's Tahoe area group regarding the so-called cultivating communities item on the agenda and the Barton construction site, if I have time. Regarding item 9A, we object to the rebranding of this Phase 3 Tahoe housing amendment and remind you that under both NEPA and CEQA, piecemealing, the practice of dividing a single project into smaller separate components to avoid a comprehensive environmental review is illegal. The EIS-EIR must include all three phases of TRPA's housing amendments. The cumulative nature of these amendments demands a comprehensive basin-wide EIS-EIR evaluating all the various as well as cumulative impacts dating back to the 2012 regional plan update. When Phase 2 was approved, TRPA assured the public that any increases in height density and coverage would be confined to existing town centers. Now you're proposing to expand town center boundaries and extend development incentives to projects that are not deed restricted. This is a clear breach of public trust. Short-term rentals need to be addressed by requiring STR operators to obtain tourist accommodation units and to contribute to mitigation fees to workforce housing programs. Additionally, exempting ADUs and other projects from development rights, coverage limits, or environmental review and expanding town centers while reducing oversight does not protect Lake Tahoe. It accelerates its decline. TRPA must restore transparency, prepare a single comprehensive EIS-EIR covering all phases, all housing phases, and reaffirm its core mission to protect the Lake Tahoe environment while supporting the people who live and work here year-round, not to serve speculative development interests. Regarding Barton construction site, which you should have my written comments on, this and TRPA's lax enforcement. We urge TRPA and the governing board to strengthen enforcement actions over Barton and other construction sites in the basin and to commit to genuine accountability and transparency in their reporting. Finally, I'd also like to object to the change in your public comment procedures once again. The deletion of public comments during the discussion of a decisional item on the agenda is tantamount to censorship. It's quite clear you have no desire to hear public comments, which further erodes public trust. Without the ability for the public to provide comments after the staff presentation, the public is shut out of the process, and public comments presented much earlier in the meeting are completely ignored. We urge you to reinstate public comments. Thank you.
3 more hands are raised. The next one is Alexis Aller. Alexis, please unmute to make your comment.
Good morning, TRPA governing board members. I am making comments today, Alexis Aller from Mountain Area Preservation, on the draft policy recommendations for cultivating community conserving the basin. I appreciate the staff report's commitment to maintaining the growth caps. I think that is really important to continue to reiterate to the public and those who are joining in on this process. While deed restricted workforce housing and affordable housing has been the goal, that needs to be maintained. Allowing these types of incentive packages to benefit market rate housing or future luxury housing is really counter to the vision and goals of this process. Additionally, I want to stress our concern with the concept of increased coverage. That is also counter to the goals of this process. We know that the science shows increased coverage creates more sediment loads into Tahoe, and we need to be maintaining the health, not continuing to degrade the health. So there are ways that we can do this and continue to advance workforce housing, deed restricted workforce housing and affordable housing without increasing environmental degradation. And just as the league stressed, increasing coverage will create that environmental degradation. So I really want to just stress that we would really appreciate that item of increased coverage be removed. Additionally, there have been discussions of exemptions, certain things such as accessory dwelling units being exempt. And I think this pertains back to the concern of the growth cap being maintained. Any new development needs to have an associated bonus unit or tourist accommodation unit tied to this. We need to ensure that the transparency of accounting for these future units, whether they're deed restricted workforce housing, deed restricted affordable, are counting towards that growth cap. And I think that's really critical for the monitoring and enforcement, not only for TRPA, but as we start to look at future housing being converted. And lastly, we're going to continue to echo our desire to see programs such as down payment assistance and lease to locals be prioritized. Every single workshop this has been brought up. It's the low hanging fruit. There's great examples to look at. And so we're going to continue to ask TRPA to prioritize this. You're prioritizing everyone changing their codes to advance housing. The TRPA can also prioritize programs that create current deed restricted housing with our current inventory. Thank you.
Next hand raised is Niobe Burden. Niobe, please unmute to make your comment.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Good morning, Governing Board and TRPA staff. This is Niobe Burden, conservation photographer, Tahoe advocate from Tahoe Vista, part of the Sierra Club Tahoe area group. I'm speaking on agenda item 9B. First, I'd like to commend TRPA staff for their progress in developing a new framework to update the environmental threshold standards. The proposed goals, objective strategies, and tactic structure, and the effort to align objectives with SMART criteria, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-framed, is an important step towards improving transparency and accountability. That said, I have a concern that the foundation of this framework relies solely on 2018 Tahoe Science Advisory Council Work Order Memorandum and earlier referenced materials. In the 7 years since that document was prepared, our understanding of the basin's environment and recreation dynamics has advanced dramatically. The scientific community, particularly UC Davis, Turk, the Desert Institute, USGS, and TSAC itself, have since developed new measurable indicators that reflect how climate change, population growth, and increased recreation pressure is impacting Lake Tahoe. These advances include real-time water quality monitoring, remote sensing of shoreline and vegetation change, and visitor use data that better capture recreation impacts in both access and experience. To ensure the updated threshold framework is credible and effective, these new indicators and technologies must be fully integrated, not just referenced or summarized from past studies, because the framework is only as strong as the data supporting it. Finally, I encourage the board to consult directly with the scientific institutions collecting this data, UC Davis, Turk, DRI, USGS, and TSAC, before finalizing SMART objectives or measurable indicators. The threshold system must reflect not just administrative structure, but current science. In addition, I urge the governing board to initiate and fund a basin-wide carrying capacity study. The study should include subcategories for recreation facilities, trailheads, parking infrastructure, shoreline access. A comprehensive analysis like this would provide the quantitative basis needed to set measurable objectives for the recreation threshold, and it would also inform wildfire evacuation planning, transportation modeling, and future updates to the regional plan. This is a rare opportunity to modernize TRPA's approach in a way that aligns data, science, and policy for the long-term protection of Lake Tahoe Basin. Let's make sure the foundation we build today reflects the realities of 2025 and beyond, not the assumptions of 2018. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
The last hand raised is Christina Hill. Christina, please unmute to make your comment.
Hello, good morning. Thank you in advance for giving the following comments your consideration. My name is Christina Hill. I've spent over 4 decades in Lake Tahoe as an environmental planner. I worked at TRPA. I was on the Washoe County Board of Adjustments, and I was on TNT, TMA. I was on the TRPA advisory board, and I've been an professional environmental consultant for the last 30 years. I am here today because I believe these proposed amendments, and this is regarding TRPA's cultivating community, item 9A on the governing board agenda. I believe these proposed amendments, referred to as updates, are a serious threat to the integrity of our region. This proposal is another major regional plan amendment allowing for more development in the form of housing. Housing will accommodate a larger population of retirees and second homeowners. It's not going to solve Lake Tahoe's problem. The plan will result in more land coverage, more high density development, creating a decrease of water quality, increase in traffic, and making air quality worse and evacuation in case of a wildfire more deadly. There's been no evaluation of impacts on existing infrastructure, level of service on our roads, scenic impacts, etc. Frankly, the plan reeks of community degradation, not cultivation. And what about our spectacular lake? These housing models are found in Aspen, Park City, Ketchum, Idaho, but I've been to these places and there's no national treasure there that compares to ours. The quality and health of our lake is decreasing year after year with more algae, more microplastics, more invasive species, and less clarity. That's what TRPA was founded to protect, not pave over as currently proposed. Please keep these concerns in mind when reviewing TRPA's latest plan that will forever change the character of our mountain communities. Respectfully submitted, Christina Hill. Thank you.
Madam Chair, there are no more hands raised to comment.
Thank you. Let's move on to agenda item 4, which is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda, Director Reagan?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We will deem the agenda approved as posted. Agenda item 5 is next, which is approval of the minutes. We have a draft set of minutes from the September 24th, 2025 meeting on page 23 of our packet. Does any member of the board want to make any changes? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Sorry, that was an aye. I think that was an aye. Let's move on then to the TRPA consent calendar. This is agenda item 6. There are 7 items on consent. 3 items were reviewed by the Operations and Governance Committee. 2 items were reviewed by the Legal Committee. 1 item was reviewed by the Transportation Committee, and 1 item was not reviewed by any governing board committee. Brooke, may we please have a report out from Operations and Governance?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Operations and Governance looked at the consent items 1, 2, and 3 that are before you today. And in summary, we are recommending approval of all 3. But I did want to go into a little bit of detail. The first item is an amendment to Rule 16.2 of the TRPA Rules of Procedure regarding the basis by which fees are adjusted annually. We use the Western States CPI. That's normal. It's what we've been doing for years. what we're asking for in this amendment is that we, in addition to using that CPI as the basis for adjusting fees annually, that we also have an or allow for a minimum fee adjustment when and if in that very unusual circumstance where the CPI indicator is negative. As you all know, our salaries go up every year, insurance goes up, benefits go up. So we don't envision a year where our expenses wouldn't increase, but we do want to safeguard against the fact that if the CPI index were negative, that we would have an opportunity to minimally adjust our fees. Right now, the fees that we collect offset our department's costs up by about 75%. We are not at full recovery, which means annually we spend about $1 million out of our general fund covering those shortages. So that is the item before us on item number 1. Item number 2 is actually applying that rule to adjust our fees for this year. Well, currently the Western State CPI is at 3.2%, and it's the recommendation of staff and the Operations and Governance Committee that we increase our fees by that amount, 3.2%. We did budget in the budget cycle that we're currently in. We anticipated a 2 to 3% increase, so you can see we're right in that range. Also want to mention 20-cent rental car fee increase is part of this as well. Its effective date is different than the CPI increase, so the committee made 2 different motions to approve those. And then finally, we have the September financials, which we talked about, if the federal government shutdown and has it had an effect on TRPA's financials. Very minimal at this point. Staff will continue to track that and will raise flags if and when necessary. Our state and fee revenue is on track and our agency expenses are on track.
Great, thanks, Brooke. Does anyone have any questions on consent calendar agenda items 1 through 3 from Brooke? Okay, next up our agenda consent calendar items 4 and 7. I'm going to take them reverse order. 7 is the consent to proceed with judicial action if necessary, depending on the outcome of ongoing settlement discussions, unauthorized tree removal and additional code violations, 614 and 618 North Ridge Road, assessor parcel numbers 091-230-007 and 008 in Placer County. Graham, the committee did give a recommendation to proceed with settlement to our general counsel. We did speak about that. I'm not sure because it was in closed session how much more.
I think we can leave it there. I mean,
Okay.
Let's still include this on the consent item calendar because just in case the negotiations fall through, our deadline for bringing action would be before the next meeting. So I think if we just keep that on there, it's the best thing to do.
Great, thank you for that. But we did recommend to our general counsel and to our legal staff some settlement options to go forward, and then they will report back to us how that goes. Then agenda item 4, excuse me, Shelley, is the resolution of enforcement action, Barton Healthcare System, failure of required BMPs resulting in discharge of sediment, 168 US Highway 50, State Line, Nevada, assessor parcel number 131822002114115, 116, and 117, which is also TRPA file number ERSP 2024-0572. Legal committee this morning did have a discussion. We heard from members of the public, we heard from representatives of Barton, we heard from staff, and we heard from our general counsel. We discussed the timeline of the BMPs, the failures, the actions Barton took. We discussed settlement and the history of settlements and how this number aligns with other previous settlements, and the legal committee did unanimously recommend approving the settlement. To give you guys a little bit more color, we did hear a presentation from our general counsel that I had asked him to repeat to all of you, and just so you all know my thinking, legal committee did vet this. We spoke at our board retreat about having committees hear projects, hear information, and then at the board level, hearing the committee read out. And then if we still had questions, we could pull it off consent, but just in keeping with that discussion we had at our board retreat, that is why I'm running it this way. But with that, I did want to ask our general counsel if he could add a little bit more, because we did get the benefit of this at legal and I thought it bore repeating today. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, I would just reiterate on the consent. I mean, certainly we've heard the comments. I want to clarify, of course, that the item did receive a public hearing. We had comments at the committee level and then also today at the governing board. So the fact this item is on consent, it's really about an efficiency tool, recognition that the board has delegated consideration of enforcement matters to be heard in public at the committee level. So it's really, of course, I want to reiterate, not a cause of a loss of public opportunity to participate. And I think that kind of transitions into a recognition. I think we want to recognize the community's interest and concern for protecting Lake Tahoe, and the level of attention that this matter reflects. It reflects how strongly people care about the lake and accountability for those who impact it. We bring enforcement matters, it seems, every few months. We do not normally receive this level of engagement, and we do appreciate it. I think, therefore, I mean, the fact that we've gotten this engagement, it's an opportunity for me to provide an opportunity to provide a little more clarification about the framework we operate under and how this settlement fits within it. So it's really important to remember that the context and the limits of TRPA's enforcement authority. Under the compact, it constrains our penalty authority to not to exceed $5,000 per day for each violation on which a violation persists. And even more importantly, we do not have unilateral authority, like other agencies do, to issue unilateral civil penalty orders the way that, just to come up with something and put it down. And it's the level of review for those types of penalty orders is very deferential to the agency. We don't have that authority for civil penalty orders. And if we can't reach a negotiated settlement agreement, our alternative is to file a federal lawsuit and really have to litigate the facts and the liability and the penalty amount in court. So it means that every enforcement action really needs to balance the strength of our legal case, the disputed facts, our evidence that we have, and the need for timely resolution. In this case, litigation, I should add, of course, we know it can take years. In this case, there are genuine disputes about both the causes and the extent of the runoff, as well as the adequacy of the BMP plan that was originally approved. And those issues would be vigorously contested if this matter went to litigation. And given that reality, settlements are by design a compromise. In this case, we are satisfied that the $50,000 settlement meets our enforcement objectives. It's fully consistent with past settlements involving comparable facts, environmental impacts. As I mentioned at legal committee, and we heard comments, all of these approved settlement agreements over the past 28 years, you can see them on our website. So you can go in there and look at comparables, see what other types of facts got a penalty assessment and a settlement agreement. And this particular settlement also ensures a tangible on-the-ground benefit. The funds are going to be used to enhance the stormwater detention basin in the same watershed, which we believe provides a measurable corrective action for this incident. From a deterrent standpoint, we believe Barton has taken the matter seriously. The site has been stabilized. BMPs have been re-engineered to a much higher standard, and we believe the site is now far better equipped today to handle winter conditions than it was last year. So again, while I understand and appreciate the public's interest in the dollar amount of the penalty, from a legal and practical standpoint, this settlement represents a strong, defensible, or proportionate resolution. And I think I just will. I said it in the legal committee. I think I will say it again here. The very fact that TRPA initiated an enforcement case here and conducted multiple inspections, Steve, our compliance manager, working diligently last fall and over the winter to really, not just there's an art to how we do this to try to bring a site into compliance. Steve doesn't just go out there right away. We're working with the site owner to get additional BMPs. You have to do that in a certain way that isn't just guns blazing, and that's what we did. last fall, and it was diligent work. And we're here bringing a settlement in public before the governing board. I think that demonstrates that we are actively enforcing our code and not looking the other way when it comes to this sort of thing. So those were my remarks, and appreciate the opportunity to weigh in there.
Thanks, Graham. And with that, are there any questions, agenda items 4 and 7? Vince?
I'm just curious, you mentioned about the penalties, that we kind of have limits to the penalties, because I do feel like they're kind of out of scale. Like if the penalty is not greater than the action that we wanted them to take that maybe they didn't, or the benefit they get, you cut down a tree and it increases your property value by, $50,000. We charge them $3,000. It's like, it's just an investment for someone. So I don't know, it sounds like we don't really have any control over or much control over that, but I guess I'd like to understand a little bit better how we could perhaps make sure that we're aligned so that people don't do these things.
Yeah, thank you, Vince. We do look at the deterrent value or deterrence, and when we negotiate settlement and penalties. And so, yeah, you do look at that sort of thing. What kind of benefit? Again, we are constrained by what the compact allows, the $5,000 per day. In the case of a tree, like you mentioned, that's we really don't. I mean, not to get too far into like some of these things that really reveal some of our, that kind of like more privileged type of assessment, which really isn't. That's what, I don't know, a commenter was responding to, but that type of methodology just not really worth discussing in open, but we can discuss in a closed session or one-on-one on how we get to those things. But yeah, I would say that at the end of the day, we're really constrained by what the compact allows. We also are a bit constrained by, like I said, the history of our 28 years or beyond, but that's what we have to look at. We have to go within a range. You can't just single out one situation and go wildly different. That would be walking us into something that we might not be able to defend. And then the last point is, like, of course, if we're in the point of litigating, we'll always seek more. We'll push our authority to the maximum amount that we can. But this type of thing represents a compromise where we're not doing that.
And if I may, what we had the benefit of hearing at legal this morning as well is what the settlement brings is compliance, really fast environmental compliance, which is what we got here. It also brought, I think the number was $1 million of BMP from Barton, that they redid their BMPs so that they are in compliance, and it was in a matter of weeks. And so I think to that number, the deterrence is one point, but quick compliance is something else that we get with the settlement. Shelley?
I just wanted to add one more thing. There's also going to be increased on-site supervision. So it will not just be a member of TRPA's enforcement staff out there looking at the site periodically to confirm compliance, but there will be somebody paid by the permittee to ensure that compliance continues.
Cody?
Yeah, this just came up as Mr. Honan been asked a question. I'm curious, could we team up? I know our authority is limited, but can we team up with our local jurisdictions to create local ordinances that would allow us to use our authorities to do things for tree removals that go beyond this 5,000 a day, and possibly use civil authorities?
Madam Chair, if I may, Julie Reagan, TRPA's Executive Director. I think, Member Bass, that's an excellent point. For example, we have had violations in the past, and we have pending matters that we're looking at where violations have occurred on state lands in the state of Nevada, state of California, under the Conservancy's ownership, the Forest Service. And that is where the power of the unified enforcement is so important. So we are working on that, and I think there are opportunities to strengthen that and potentially going beyond with local governments as well. And I just wanted to underscore, and I appreciate the chance to have this discussion because it has generated such extensive public comment. It's a great educational opportunity for all of us to be reminded that the compact is different. We are not a state agency. We do not have the same enforcement powers as the Lahontan Water Quality Control Board or the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection. The compact is where we take our marching orders for enforcement. We're such a unique entity in that we have planning and enforcement authority. Most regional planning entities do not have enforcement authority. So it's a wonderful combination that we think is a deterrent for future violations. So I appreciate the chair bringing that up as well. But it's something that we have direction of staff to work closely with other jurisdictions and with other partners to do some joint enforcement and to make sure that also sends a message, to future applicants who may have violations going forward.
And unless I hear any other questions on 4 or 7, I will move on, checking online. I will move on to Transportation Committee, who met this morning. If we could please have a report out on consent calendar number 5.
Yeah, sure. I chaired the committee this morning. It was a great report. First started with Michelle Glickert giving us an update kind of at where we're at with our RTP process and the funding as that's coming through. And then Mr. Jim Marino came from the Tahoe Transportation District to show us the plans that are in place along mainly the SR 28 corridor and somewhat the timeframes that are going to be moving through those different projects and where the funding is at with some of them. It was a great report and we really took no action. It was just both informational items.
Thank you, Cody. Any questions on consent calendar agenda item number 5? Seeing none, consent calendar item number 6 is the National Community Planning Month resolution. Information on this item can be found on page 153 of your packets. Do any board members have any questions on this item? Seeing none, I'm looking for a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Move approval.
Thank you. We have a motion. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, staff, can you please call the roll for a vote?
Ms. Alding,
Yes.
Mr. Bass,
Yes.
Mr. Aguilar,
Yes.
Ms. Conrad Seda,
Yes.
Ms. Hill, Ms. Faustinos,
Yes.
Mr. Keycapper,
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Mr. Rice,
Yes.
Mr. Henigman,
Yes.
Mr. Settlemeyer,
Yes.
Ms. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Loomer,
Yes.
Ms. Williamson.
Yes,
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
thank you. Let's move on then to agenda item 7, which is the TMPO consent calendar. There is one item on consent, which is reviewed by the Transportation Committee. Can we have a report out, please, Cody, on the TMPO consent calendar item?
Move to TMPO.
Do I have a motion to adjourn as TRPA and reconvene as TMPO? Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Now, Cody, can we please have the TMPO?
Actually reported that inaccurate. I will go to correct the record. It's actually the Tahoe Transportation overall work program that we heard. And we did take actual action to approve that and the consent, moving to the consent on TMPO. Essentially, again, this is our overall work program. That is the transportation program that, again, it's showing the projects that have been approved and funded, as well as some that still are in phases that need to have funding put forward. And I think the TRPA has shown that they're doing great work in this area, and our board unanimously approved it.
Thank you. If any questions or comments on this item? If not, I'm looking for a motion to approve the TMPO consent calendar.
So moved.
Thank you. We have a motion. Any discussion? Okay, Maria, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Holding,
Yes.
Mr. Bass,
Yes.
Mr. Aguilar,
Yes.
Ms. Conrad Seda,
Yes.
Ms. Hill, Ms. Faustinos,
Yes.
Mr. Keycapper,
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Mr. Rice,
Yes.
Mr. Henigman,
Yes.
Mr. Settlemeyer,
Yes.
Ms. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Loomer,
Yes.
Ms. Williamson,
Yes,
Madam Chair, motion passes.
thank you. And I need
Madam
a,
Chair, I move to adjourn as the TMPO and reconvene as TRPA.
thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we're back as TRPA. We heard the Lake Tahoe Spirit Awards. Congrats everyone again. We are now moving on then to agenda item 9, which is planning matters. Agenda item 9A is a presentation on the draft policy recommendations for cultivating community, conserving the basin project. Information on this item can be found on page 167. This is an information only item, not agendized for action. So as a reminder to the public, since this item is information only, we can hear public comment on this again at the end of the meeting as well. Take it away, staff, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. John Hester for the record. This is the first of 3 times you'll hear this. And I wanted to give you a little context before Karen gets into a little more detail. And today is about introducing the information to you, no decisions. Some of you, and I won't name them, were around in 2012 when we adopted the regional plan, including a number of staff here, myself included. And there were a number, we did an environmental impact statement, and there were a number of mitigation measures. I believe it was mitigation measure number 8 said that as a result of the 2012 regional plan amendments, we should do a study on housing and implement that study. And we did do that study. It was conducted by a consulting firm called BAE, who has done other studies subsequently for us and for member governments. And their primary recommendation was that we look at development rights and how they could be changed to maybe help with housing. So like we do every few years, we created a strategic initiative called the Development Rights Strategic Initiative. I have photos of Shelley showing that in fact that happened. Those of you who've seen the presentation, she was Vanna and Bill was presenting the 24 alternatives I think we looked at. But the point was at that point, we created some ability to transfer from one type of development right to the other. The objective being that more housing units could be built if other types of development were reduced. COVID came along, as we all know, and we had the what's been referred to as the Zoom town effect of more people moving here and working remotely. And the board rightly said we need to continue working on housing. So we had the Tahoe Living Initiative started. A working group was formed and they came to the board and recommend, which also includes board members and APC members. You delegated the chair role of that to the chair of the APC, Brendan Ferry, who still does that, who still is that chair. And they recommended 3 phases of work. The first phase, where we looked at ADUs and the California law and conversion ratios between hotel rooms and housing. The second phase, which was height, density, coverage, and parking. And now we're to the third phase, which Karen will get into a little more detail about. Like I said, we'll have 3 meetings, this meeting and 2 more about that before we start the environmental impact statement. So the point is, we are now doing planning to do an environmental impact statement on an earlier environmental impact statement mitigation measure. So I think that's important for the board to know that we feel like being very thorough in our environmental analysis, and also for you to have that 13-year context as we move into this. So with that, I'll turn it over to Karen.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. Karen Fink, Principal Planner with the Long Range Planning Team. I'm standing in today for Jacob Stock, who's the Senior Planner leading this project. Before I get into the presentation, I actually have a pop quiz for you. So does anyone know what the average size of accessory dwelling units are that have been built in the Tahoe Basin since we approved our accessory dwelling unit amendments in 2020? The average size, any guesses? Very good. Okay, you guys are right on 694 square feet. And I just want to say that compares favorably to the average size new single family home, which is coming in over 2,000 square feet. And if you would like more information like this, you can visit the accessory dwelling unit dashboard, which is updated and maintained by our reporting and accountability department. And you can find that on our housing, on TRPA's webpage and our Tahoe Living webpage. So as John mentioned, the purpose of this, if I talk like this, can you hear me? Okay. The purpose of this presentation today is to tee up the Cultivating Community, Conserving the Basin project for you. And that is, as John mentioned, the current phase of the Tahoe Living Strategic Priority, which is where we focus on the housing goals of the regional plan. And we want you to have a chance. We're giving you this informational item today before coming back in November and then again in January, because we just want you to have a chance to start familiarizing yourself with the information, which is going to be eventually a pretty large package, and have a chance to review it kind of in stages. We've presented a high-level summary today. In November, we're going to be bringing you a more detailed packet that'll be related to what we've presented today in your packet. So next slide, please. So before I get into the policy recommendations, I just want to zoom in a little bit on where we are in the schedule of this process overall. So just highlight a little bit of the details for the next 3 months. And our purpose, again, is to, give you plenty of time to think about the proposals, understand them, and provide feedback before we move these policy proposals into analysis in an environmental impact statement. So today we're doing an informational briefing. In November, we'll be coming back with a workshop for you where we're really going to sit down with you and, hear from you what you want to keep of the proposals, what you think should be modified, what we should drop. And then we're going to do a similar workshop with the Advisory Planning Commission. And then we'll come back in January with a refined policy proposal that will go into the environmental analysis. And just one more thing I want to mention. Once we start analyzing these policies in the EIS, and then they will come back to you eventually after being analyzed for consideration for adoption. At that point, we can always dial the proposal back, but we can't expand it at that point. So we really want to make sure that at this point, we're analyzing everything in the EIS that we think we want to consider. So we are trying to cast a pretty wide net, and you'll see that in the proposal. Next slide, please. So again, the Tahoe Living Strategic Priority is one of 4 strategic priorities of the agency that you approved in your operations work plan this year. And the Tahoe Living Priority focuses on addressing the housing goals that are in the housing chapter of the regional plan, while achieving, and another really big focus is to simultaneously achieve our environmental goals. So the focus of this is we have folks that steward and protect Lake Tahoe's environment and our communities and power our economy, and they need a place to live. Next slide, please. So John went over this actually. So I'm just really high level going to say, I think the main takeaway from where we've been since 2012 and why we're back here now with this, most in-depth phase of Tahoe Living is a lot has changed since 2012. As John was mentioning, we were coming out of a recession in 2012. We had COVID. We shared, this nationwide pandemic that introduced Tahoe as a Zoom town to many people. There are nationwide economic forces pressuring housing markets in many, many communities. And I think, where we're really at is it's time to look at our growth management system and seeing if the regulations that were put in place in 2012 with a certain understanding of what sizes and types of homes would be built, is that still functioning the same way? And is it, are the regulations that we have in place still the best way to get the environmental protections that we envision? And are the regulations under that growth management system the best way to achieve housing that matches the needs of our local communities? So that's really the point of the cultivating community process. So next slide, please. And so just another, point here, we, again, emphasis on maintaining and improving the environment and our thresholds always. We know that we need to provide access to housing. And then we also really want to engage those that are most impacted by the housing crisis. And that's been a big emphasis in this process. We've mentioned this before, but convened a community partner group, which has representatives from social service agencies that are directly working with and serving the folks that are most impacted by the housing crisis. And we were getting some comments on the rebranding of the name, and we were actually very intentional about that. We wanted to choose a name that was actually descriptive and help people understand what the goals of the project were. We found that when we're just calling our amendments phases, that wasn't very helpful for people to understand what we're trying to do. So before I move on to the next slide, I do just want to emphasize one more aspect of cultivating community. And you've seen this in your packet, that one of the key assumptions in the proposed policy changes that we're bringing forward is that this effort does not intend to increase the growth potential over what's already approved in the current regional plan. We are definitely, looking at some different options for how to, within that growth management system, simplify the process for people who want to build workforce housing. But ultimately, there's quite a bit of unused development potential that we think we can shift. So next slide, please. So after this, the slide after this gets into a bit of the detail that was in your packet, and I'll just then touch briefly on kind of the policy direction. But before we get there, I just wanted to just a reminder how we got to this part of the cultivating community process. So we've been working on this for the last 10 months, really in depth. And even before that, we were getting started with getting, consultants on board and things like that. But basically over the last 10 months, we've had 4 meetings with our Tahoe Living Working Group. We've had 5 meetings with the community partner group. We've had 6 community workshops on both the North Shore and the South Shore. We've also had one-on-one briefings with individual groups and with some of the board members who requested that. So we appreciate that. And all of that has led us through the first, a few key milestones in this project. So the first one was through these meetings and these processes was developing consensus around the project goals. And that's what the governing board approved in March 2026, and that was in your packet. And then the next stage that we worked on with everybody was generating the ideas of how to meet those goals. And so now we're past that phase and we're into the refinement phase. Now we're refining the policies that we heard and we need to analyze them in the environmental analysis. So, so that's basically what you're going to see in the next slide is what the current draft of the refined policies. Next slide, please. Okay, so here I just want to orient you to what you're going to see in more detail in November. So in your packet, we had a high level description of 5 key policy areas. And that is high level. And just in November, we'll bring more detail, but they were organized by those policy areas. In November, we're going to start to organize them by the bolded topics that you see here to really kind of be clear and align what we're doing with the ultimate goals of the project, what we're trying to achieve. So, one of the big things that we've really heard is that small units face disproportionately high costs during the application process. You heard that a bit during the comments, particularly in obtaining a development right. So small units basically have to do everything that a large unit does, but the cost for them to build is the cost for them to construct and buy their property is much less. So those costs are disproportionately high for them. And we really actually heard, I would say, quite a bit during our Tahoe Living Working Groups and the community the community workshops, that there was a lot of support for really removing as many of those requirements as we can from the applicant's side. So simplifying the process for them from the point of view of development rights and coverage. That doesn't mean that TRPA wouldn't be tracking those development rights to make sure we're not exceeding our growth management system, but the individual homeowner who wants to build an accessory dwelling unit, they would not have to go out and find that development right and buy it and transfer it in. We also heard quite a bit of support for not even deed restricting some of these units, like allowing them to have a simplified process, but not requiring a deed restriction, or requiring a very simple deed restriction that basically just required that the unit be a primary residence, or restricting it so that it couldn't be used as a short-term rental. So those were some things that we heard pretty strongly. Obviously, there were other concerns that we just want to make sure that the housing, as much of the housing as possible ends up serving our workforce. Some other points that I wanted to make here is onto the second one, more housing choice. One of the policy options in the packet is to allow more missing middle housing types, such as duplexes through fourplexes in more areas. And we again heard quite a bit of support for that. Again, some back and forth about whether some or all of these should be deed restricted, but support for just allowing that kind of traditional home that you used to see more often in our neighborhoods, and that provides, actually even now provides quite a bit of our workforce housing where it was built earlier. And then another thing is standards and zoning. So support for letting local governments have more flexibility in how they meet their housing need and encourage environmental redevelopment. And then finally, the last bullet, meeting water quality and achieving our environmental thresholds, our environmental resilience is very important. As you heard, coverage is probably the biggest barrier that we continue to hear about, but obviously maintaining our water quality standards is critical. And so we are looking at, are there ways that projects can still be held to those very high water quality standards, but have more flexibility in how they actually meet them? So maybe a multifamily project, which actually has multiple units that have a much smaller footprint than other, single family housing, can we allow more coverage on that parcel as long as that project can treat water quality to the necessary standard? So those are the things that we, are in your packet, and we want to hear more from you. We'll be discussing them with you in small groups. You can talk about the pros and cons, concerns, and then again, we'll be moving all of this into the environmental impact statement for analysis. And just again, we really heard consistently that we want to remain consistent with the growth potential of the current plan. And then another, big takeaway, I think, is that we heard that we want maximum effectiveness in achieving environmental goals with the least amount of complexity. So that's what we're trying to do with this. And then, what's in your packet right now really reflects about a thoughtful process about midway through the project, and it's subject to ongoing legal review and environmental analysis. So next slide, please. So just back to the schedule before we close, just a reminder, so in January, we will ask for your action on what policies we'll be analyzing in the environmental impact statement. That analysis will take the better part of 2026. And throughout that time, we'll be having other workshops with the community to make sure they understand the proposal. We'll have a lot of opportunity to do more education. And then we'll have multiple hearings with you. There'll be a 60-day review period of the EIS, all of that. And so so again, in November, so for now, look at the 13-page high-level summary that we've provided in this packet. In November, you're going to get a more detailed document that's about 35 pages. We're still synthesizing some of the input that we've received, and we want to make sure that what you see in November really reflects, the input that we heard and, why we went with one policy or a different recommendation. And then we want to make sure that we can jump right into the discussion with you in November and have as much time to really workshop the policies. And so feel free to contact us in the meantime if you have any questions about any of this, and there'll be plenty of time to ask questions in November as well, and right now in addition. So the last slide is just a link to our Tahoe Living webpage where we have all the information about this project, and all the summaries of the community workshops are there as well. So with that, thank you, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Karen. Any questions or comments from the board? We're gonna go around the horn. I don't see Brooke, though. Nope. All right, we're gonna start with Cody.
Yeah, great work. I haven't been able to make a lot of these workshops, but I know there's been a lot of participation. I think that's really awesome. I think one thing for us a little bit in Southlake that kind of comes up is that how are we going to get the other jurisdictions to really participate in the housing crisis in a sense at the same level that we all are, understanding that, you know, for sure Carson City doesn't have the same opportunities as the city of Southlake, but is there an effort to look at, okay, in a certain metric, you know, you have this many employees in your county in the basin, therefore you should be working to provide this amount of housing, and actually trying to create, you know, between the 5 counties and the city, some type of benchmarks that need to be met, so that we all feel. I think that, you know, some of the sentiment we hear sometimes is that, like Sugar Pine Village, which is a great project, however, we can't make that just for Southlake residents. Really, we don't want to, but we would like to see that those opportunities exist. And we're not building housing just for, you know, the whole basin, but the whole basin is building housing. So I'm just curious what, if there's that kind of thought being put into this.
So that definitely came up during our discussion with the Tahoe Living Working Group when we were talking about more flexibility for local jurisdictions to decide, you know, what kind of development they want. There was a concern that some jurisdictions wouldn't, you know, do as many incentives as others. There is not a policy specifically to that yet. So that's not in your packet, and that's feedback that we can definitely take. And, you know, maybe we want to workshop that a little bit more in November. I will say that we are, as part of the EIS, we're doing an updated regional housing needs assessment that will look at it'll look at the housing need kind of by jurisdiction, and we're also going to compare it to the jobs by jurisdiction, so we can kind of get a look at like what are the proportions that we might want to be considering. And so that will be a document that you'll be able to look at and can inform the discussion.
I want to add one point to that too, is there is a distinction between the California jurisdictions and the Nevada jurisdictions, because as you probably know, the California jurisdictions have to meet what are called RHNA, Regional Housing Needs Assessment numbers that come from the state. And we participate, for example, with your staff and the state and us to kind of align that with the growth management. So they aren't asking you to do more than you have development for, and the Nevada side doesn't do that. So we got to try to figure out how to balance that as well. So it's not something we can probably do unilaterally and uniformly.
Right. Okay. And so my second question kind of gets around, you know, we're going to create these benefits, which I fully support, but we're not making it to where you have to deed restrict it. And I kind of understand that gets a lot more complicated, but it starts to open up what I brought up before, which is the decision, I believe in 2011, maybe I'm off, but that a residential unit of use was able to be an SDR, short-term rental. And not that I'm suggesting though that we kind of go back and change that, but if we're not going to do deed restrictions, I'm wondering if there's like a second residential unit of use permit that also can't be an SDR, right? So we're not having to like change and go back all the way, but if we're going to allow these benefits, this RUU has like a second side of it, because you got these benefits that you can't be an SDR. And if you wanted to go back and become an SDR, well, then you've got to go through this new environmental review, and you've got to pay for the coverage that we gave you for free, because that wasn't the intention, if you get what I mean. It kind of starts to open that back up. And I know that's a lot that the board has not wanted to necessarily get into the business of and let local jurisdictions. But if we are going to be allowing these coverages and we're not going to do deed restrictions, I feel like we need to put more teeth in making sure that these aren't going to become SDRs, and if they, and then make the pathway back for them in a way if they want to, but it should include everything that we would have required before these things. I just don't, I don't want to close what could be a potential loophole.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to, that's a great input and it really reflects what we heard from the public as well. And I just want to clarify a few things. So to the point that we want to cast a wide net in this analysis, the proposal does in most cases is talking about these incentives that they could go to some market rate. And we, there's a whole thing in here, the scaling development, scaling of fees. I didn't really go into that much, but I'm happy to talk about that a little bit more, where we're really trying to look at analyzing, is there an environmental and community impact based on size? And so should our fees and potentially our development rights be scaled differently to incentivize smaller units? And so the smaller units that doesn't mean they won't be used as a short-term rental, but they're more likely to be able to be used as a local housing. That's what we found. So that's one thing that's in the package. But just we definitely, so we are proposing now that we analyze quite a few options that allow market rate, because we want to make sure we're analyzing the full potential, package. But that doesn't mean that even in November and January, we can't scale that back if we're concerned now, or when we get the environmental analysis and we come back with policies, we'll have a chance to reconsider, do we want to add, require that more of this be deed restricted? So that definitely came up. That's the ongoing concern. It's like, how do we make this as simple as possible? Deed restrictions add complexity, but they're also the protection for how the units don't bleed into the second home market. So that's probably like the most difficult thing we have to deal with in this process. And yes, just the deed restriction that only included short-term rentals was definitely came up multiple times in the process. So that could be something that we look at.
Belinda, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. Thank you very much for the presentation. And this is really helpful in terms of having a, through line to, where we need to end up, and appreciate all the documentation. So two things. I actually do really agree with Mr. Cody's comment that we need to establish benchmarks, but those benchmarks I think need to be based on data that's well researched. So I really appreciate hearing that you're going through a needs assessment process, because I think you can't establish those benchmarks until you have the data to demonstrate what the need is. So that's cool. And then just the other general comment, I think I've said this before, but I really appreciate the fact that there was an academy established as part of this to educate the public so they could meaningfully participate in the process, instead of going into a meeting where there's, a bajillion acronyms being thrown out there. They're like, duh. And that's me a lot of the time as well, because this stuff is so difficult to understand. And so providing the education for the general public in order for them to meaningfully participate, I think was awesome. So thank you for that.
Great. Thank you for bringing that up. I forgot to call it out on the slide. So,
James?
Thank you. I was just kind of curious, you were commenting on the size, kind of being in a realm of 620 to, 630 or something of that nature. And I just kind of a question of, did you do any research on who are living in those? Are we talking single occupancy? You talking about a married with no kids? What type of information you might have on that? I asked that question in relation to my knowledge of knocking doors way back when in Northwood, Southwood area, when I was knocking on hotel doors and realizing that 6 to 7 people were living in a motel room.
thank you for bringing that up. So the housing needs assessment, the ones that we already have and the one that we're doing, does look at household size. And so that will be part of, they put forward the assessment includes a estimate of how many units, studios, you need 1 unit, 1 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms and things like that. I do also want to point out that one of the things we have heard from the community partner group in particular is that many working families are actually large and need bigger homes. And that is something we don't have a great answer for that in this process. And maybe we want to keep thinking about how we deal with that. The traditional way to have larger homes for low income households is to subsidize that housing, like we've seen with Sugar Pine Village and other projects. As far as getting the market to provide those larger units, let's keep talking about that. So that has come up for sure. Thank you.
If I can follow up, I appreciate that. And if we had any information maybe of what we know within the Tahoe Basin area, so that could help us as we make some of these type of decisions. Because I found it very interesting, compelling, and it was just amazing to me that we have families up here that are working families that are in essence hot bunking. I found out one family had it AM, one family had it PM. And I found that very shocking. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Belinda, I'm going to go around the horn. I promise I'll come back. Cindy?
Thank you, and thanks for all the work. And I too haven't been able to attend the meetings. I've just had conflicts with other meetings, but I really appreciate the work and the discussion on scaling. It's so critical. We have quite a few growing number of trophy homes, I would call them, and far less investment in trying to help our communities and workforce. And so I like the idea of scaling. I obviously would love to extend it to utilities and fees and all kinds of other obstacles that we see in actually getting the housing built with sewer hookups, water, all those things, because I still don't think, even with the work that has been done by the other agencies, that we've really hit that number. I'm interested because I hear this all the time, that coverage is more important than the water quality. And when I say that, I mean, the science shows us we can treat water quality on a site very effectively. But the concept of coverage gets in our way. So what steps are we taking to really address the science behind how we treat that water quality to ensure we're doing everything we can on water quality and have the public understand that and work with our environmental organizations and groups to understand that it can be done and it can be done very effectively versus relying on coverage that I see in many of these larger homes become parking areas and other things that are really not effective, but they meet the coverage of their property. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is probably, I could give you probably a 30-minute answer, but I'll try.
Okay, well, let's not, but assure me that we're working to study this and that we bring in our interest groups so that we really try to.
We are.
Yeah.
And just to kind of give you a quick response, the total maximum daily load, or TMDL, has the whole basin divided into catchments. And each catchment has a loading of pollutants into the lake. Some are high priority because they load more than others. And the whole idea of coverage, which came about, I want to say 40 years ago, roughly, was that because a lot of the development in Tahoe had already occurred, and you know from West Slope and others know that anytime you do a subdivision of land now, you build in storm drains. Streets work as a collection system. You build in storm drains. They take the water to retention and detention basins that filter out the pollutants and all that. We don't have that in a lot of the development around here. So the coverage idea came out of a way to manage forest lands, but we also applied it in the urban areas, which is if we limit the development, the impervious development on a parcel based on its slope, soil, geomorphology, we can try to get the same effects through BMPs or best management practices as if we had these stormwater systems and stormwater utilities. There are some challenges with the BMP process in that there's not always maintenance, there's not always 100% compliance. And so back to the catchments, there's a model or analysis tool we use called a pollutant load reduction model. And every catchment has a pollutant load reduction amount they're supposed to meet. So when we go in and talk with someone about is this really a viable alternative to use a stormwater collection system or stormwater utility to reduce erosion as much or more than we would have just by limiting coverage, we run that pollutant load reduction model. So it's very quantitative, and you can actually look and see, oh, there may be a piece of the system you need to add so you have a stormwater system. And I know you know a lot of this from your days at Tahoe City Public Utilities, but so we are working in South Lake Tahoe and have funding to work on a couple catchments in Placer County to actually analyze with the pollutant load reduction model, can we get better water quality with a stormwater system than we do with the BMPs parcel by parcel? And so that's probably more than most wanted to know, but that's how we're actually rigorously looking at, can we switch over? And if the pollutant load reduction model on a certain catchment shows it won't make any difference, then we say, why invest the money in a system? So it's not a one size fits all, but it is a very rigorous process. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and I just know from, you know, various projects that we implemented, you know, the mechanical systems and the filtration can be checked and monitored. BMPs are very much more difficult, right? And so for projects, and that's not going to be available to some of the smaller projects maybe to invest because they're very expensive. But they're incredibly effective. And so, you know, at least when we have larger projects, being able to look at that in addition to the traditional, because you can, any day, somebody can go and look at the filter and see that it's in place, it's effective, and it's working, compared to BMPs can be a little, as you know, more challenging to see.
A little more detail, because the rest of you maybe go, how do you get from a parcel to an area-wide system? We are in our code now, and what we're proposing is you could, as a bridge technology, put in BMPs on a project if the local government will take responsibility for those being monitored and maintained. And then when you get enough, you could convert over. So we're looking at all those ways.
Vince?
Thanks. And thank you for the presentation and all the work you guys have done. As chair of RPC and a member of the Tahoe Living Working Group, I just wanted to comment on some things that people covered in public comments that I didn't hear addressed. So I just wanted to make sure, because the comment was made that we aren't listening, and we do listen. And there's been a lot of listening going on over these 10 months. And so I wanted to make sure to just note those things. The comment was made that there are millions of square feet that can be converted into housing or something like that. I mean, I think it was an exaggeration, obviously, but I believe the number of available housing units that we're showing remaining already include conversion of, I mean, I guess it depends where you're talking about it, but a lot of numbers. And that number is,
So with the conversions, there's about 6,000 units remaining. And some of these numbers are in a briefing book, which is on the TahoeLiving.org website.
Great. So that number is out there, so you can see the extent. Let's see. A lot of these things are also that we're proposing are things that counties or the city have asked for that they can do additionally, but aren't going to be placed on them, like potentially expanding town centers or extra incentives for using the incentives for market rate. And I want to talk a little bit about that. The goal here, I think all of us have been kind of upset about some of the buildings and things that have come before us, and we've approved them because they meet our codes, but it's not what we want. As someone who does development in Southern California, I can give you an insight into how development works. Every property, you have to figure out what the best mousetrap is. What's the most profitable thing you can build on that site based on the laws? Otherwise, someone else will do that and they will beat you and you'll never get the land. So right now, our codes give us what we don't want: large luxury units. We have low density, so they're bigger units. All of our codes kind of conspire to create that. What we are trying to do is make the highest and best use for the land what we want. Small multifamily homes in town centers where they're walkable and transit serviceable. And right now, that's the hardest stuff to build in the basin. Luxury housing is the easiest. So we are trying to convert the codes to give us more housing for local workers and for people of lower incomes in those town centers, and also to reuse existing buildings. We can potentially provide incentives to do that as well, because that's something that the locals have expressed that they would like to see more of, and we have those buildings. I would encourage the public to get really involved in all the public meetings, because the policy is not going to be shaped at these board meetings. It's shaped in all the public meetings that we have generally. So I hope you will get involved and not just expect to show up when we're looking to approve these things, because by that point, they'll have been worked on for several years, and a lot of money and time and a lot of other public input. And there's no reason to think that public input at that period is worth more than all the other public input. And I would also encourage the board to go through those policy recommendations, because there's a lot of stuff and it's complex. And if you just see it all at once, your head's going to blow. So take a look, start letting it seep in, much like, polluted water seeping in, filtering out all the good ideas. And then we'll get back at our next meeting to debate it. So those are my comments, and thank you everyone who's participated in the public and on the board in all these sessions. It's been a ton of time, but I think there's some really great ideas that will change things in the basin. So thank you.
Thanks, Vince. Shelley? I'll go last. Thank you. We're gonna do Shelley, and then Ashley has her hand up, and then back to Belinda. Go ahead.
So when we're talking about ADUs and the potential of allowing them to be built without a development right, as long as TRPA accounts for them internally, I mean, every vacant lot in this basin has an inherent residential unit of use, right? So how is that going to affect the undeveloped lots that are developable but have not been developed for whatever reason? The people who own them, they were passed down through generations and they just don't have the wherewithal to develop the lots right now. If you're accounting for them internally, that means you're reducing the availability of not only allocations, which is a development right, but I don't understand. To me, it seems like if you're accounting for them internally to maintain our growth caps, then somebody's going to suffer. Somebody who hasn't developed their lot is going to be denied the right to build. So I don't want this agency to find itself, being sued, because they have basically their right to develop, which was inherent, is now been eliminated or diminished.
Thank you. What the current proposal is, and it's not in this much detail in your packet in October, but this detail will be shown in November. The current proposal is to look at whether we can convert some of our unused commercial floor area and TAUs and potentially even, sorry, blanking out on on payouts to the bonus unit pool and determine what types of development we're wanting to incentivize that may or may not be deed restricted. And so TRPA would just draw from the bonus unit pool. We wouldn't be drawing down from the allocations or from individual parcels. I mean, someone could still sell off their residential unit of use from their parcel. Yeah, that's what the proposal currently is.
Just want us to be in a position when we're sued for a taking.
Yeah.
Okay. And I know, Karen, you and I had a brief conversation. And I don't know that it necessarily needs to be analyzed in the environmental analysis, but what is the current vacancy rate at the state line casinos? Does anyone have an idea?
Yeah, I don't want to be quoted on it. It's right on the tip of my tongue though, because I sit on LTVA and we do see it from Zartico. I just don't want to put it on the record because I don't want to be wrong. Yeah, ballpark, I want to say summertime 70%, and it comes back into like the 50, even 40s in the October shoulder season.
Okay, so I think we're missing an opportunity here. I understand that they have to comply with local zoning requirements, but I'm wondering if some of those zoning laws, and I don't know how TRPA's code would have to be amended to allow some of these rooms to be equipped with some cooking facilities and be used for seasonal workers. Because then they kind of, they go from being used as motel or hotel rooms into extended stay units. And that may require some manipulating of the local code requirements and potentially of TRPA's code. But I think we're missing an opportunity here. It's just like some of the large employers, you know, some of them outside the basin, you know, have acquired units inside the basin, Palisades in particular, but that doesn't reduce VMT because people are commuting to Palisades from other places within the basin. But I just think the people who employ the most people should have some obligation to provide on-site housing, you know, if the land and the coverage is available. I mean, that's where they're working. They don't have to drive to work. They can walk to work. I mean, it just seems like low-hanging fruit. And the casinos, you know, obviously they've gone through some difficult times. But the fact is, you know, perhaps they can charge a marginal rent by converting some of their hotel rooms to accommodate their own workers. I just think it needs to be explored. As I say, I'm not sure that it needs to be analyzed in an environmental document, but I think it's worth having a conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ashley?
Thanks. And thanks everyone for the great questions and comments so far. And the presentation was really excellent. I appreciate it and look forward to doing my homework for next month. I just had a couple of questions about like the scale of fiscal demand to meet the RENA assessments or just general housing requirements to actually, if we were to really provide enough housing, or, you know, not us, but in the region, if the region provided enough housing for everyone who needed it, what's that fiscal demand based on what we know about like average per square foot building or conversion? And the reason I ask is because, you know, California obviously has put billions of dollars of its cap and trade funding into affordable housing. And so there's a way to meet a portion of that demand. And it would be sort of interesting to get a sense of, you know, where that opportunity lies, where the demand is, and put together a package of potential funding sources. And again, with the reauthorization of now Cap and Invest in California, there's more of that opportunity. But to get ahead of affordable housing allocations and say, like, this is the demand, we've calculated it, this is the portion that if it could come from California, we could provide X, Y, or Z units or conversion in the state. So you've, I'm sure, done some of those calculations, and I'm just missing them, and I need to do my homework before next month. But I was just thinking about that, and you know, we could show something commensurate for Nevada to also potentially encourage the types of regulations that bring in those affordable housing and community transformation dollars.
We don't, that is not in the package yet, but we are planning to bring some cost estimates. It sounds like you're saying kind of like what would be, if we multiply the subsidy needed by the housing need, what would the fiscal need be? Yes. So we definitely want to include some numbers like that. Hopefully by November, if not, then by January.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And back to Belinda.
Yes, just quickly, the comment made by Mr. Settlemeyer about the large families. I think the other thing that I've recognized is that in particular with seasonal housing, you have 10 service industry employees living in one small studio apartment. So how we track that, and I think that, you know, ties into Ms. Aldine's comment about, you know, how can we use casino vacant hotel space in casinos to meet that need? You know, so it's a you know, big issue, and yes, large families, but then you also have, and I personally know someone who comes here every winter and bunks up with like 6 people and you know, not even 1 bedroom, I don't think. So that's definitely, I think, a critical need that we have to figure out how to parse out in this whole process.
Yes, thank you. And actually, I did want to clarify, I kind of misspoke a little bit. I wouldn't say that that none of the policies address that. Definitely some of the policies do address that. Still, you know, there's looking at ways to relieve burdens for deed restricted homes of a variety of sizes. It's not all related to scaling and just trying to incentivize smaller units. So yes. And also, we also heard a lot of support for trying to incentivize like co-housing or dorms or boarding house types of development.
Yeah, thank you. So a little bit back to the RUU discussion, but as I've thought about it more, it brings me back to a few years ago. And going into looking at that short-term rental and having to not force a deed restriction on somebody, but adding like an RUU-STR. And when we looked at it before, there was also a thought that similar to the short-term rental permits in the city that, expire annually, that have to be renewed and they come with fees. I know the TRPA can actually have a mitigation fee that's tied to something like transportation and the impact that these units put on transportation and our transportation system. And so I'm wondering if we look at this, if we added like the RUU-STR, the STR part is, has to be renewed annually, and this mitigation fee for transportation needs to be paid. And even if it's 500 a STR unit times 7,000, we're at 3.5 million to transit funding. That's a local match. And so I just think that I think this is a good opportunity to see if that's a possibility. And I would ask if, when we pass this, is that something that we could amend and add into the kind of RUU code? And you may not know that now, so we can, if you don't, no worries.
We can look at that in the package that we bring in November and,
Great.
and put it out for discussion.
And then just a simple comment, because Ms. Gustafson's question. So I'm in the Bijou area and we had the Bijou water erosion project. And I believe that if I join that, I have to pay the assessment parcel. It certifies my BMPs on my commercial property, right? So is that science kind of already been done with that in particular water management project to say that as long as you're a member of it and they put in the drains that go to that project, basically it's done more than the BMP? That has kind of already been determined, but is that just a project by project basis, or?
It's not necessarily, when you say project, do you mean development project or do you mean?
Or just the
area-wide
analysis
BMP?
of this, joining this is going to do more for the water quality than the BMPs would
Yeah,
have.
that's
kind of
done,
situation.
that's done by catchments, like, the current one in the city is called, Mountain to Marina, I think. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one. Thanks for the question. Julie Reagan here, TRPA. The Bijou pump and treat erosion control where by John's Cleaners, all of the underground vaults, that was an environmental improvement program similar to Harrison Avenue. There are a couple of area-wide projects that we've been able to do at that scale where you pay in and then it satisfies your parcel BMPs. But that is very specific to those investments in that EIP project. Mountain to Marina would be the next big one in that same general region, just going up into the neighborhoods. And then I just to piggyback on your question, Member Bass, around the vacation home rentals, and I do think we'll dig into some of those issues. And just for the record, I did want to clarify, because this does come up so often in public comment, and you mentioned it in your comments. It was 2004 when this board took action to change the code of ordinances definition that allowed vacation home rentals for residential homes. That had always been the practice. Like there was never historically a requirement to have a TAU or anything different for you to rent your house out, because the majority of properties in Tahoe, for as long as I've been here, 30 plus years, the majority of properties have always been part-time residences, more than 50% in the basin. It's exceeded far beyond that since then in some areas of the basin, particularly the North Shore, as Member Gustafson knows very well. But it was just to clarify, and it allowed the vacation home rental as part of a residential unit in the code. So it wasn't a change necessarily, but it formalized that in the definition. I just want to make that clear.
I appreciate that. And I think that, what's very different than 04 is our local jurisdictions, most of them at least, and I think maybe all of them, have developed programs that we want the TOT, of course. We also want to regulate our neighborhoods. That wasn't existing in 04, right? And so it's very easy to know, hey, you're a second homeowner that just uses your home or family friends, or you're actually making this a business, in a sense, a business in a way. You're paying TOT to the city. And so at that point is where I think this, I'll just call it RUU-STR, because I know the TAU thing is too complicated to kind of open back up. And this is almost in a suggestion of like a whole new thing rather than open up the TAU.
And that
policy.
exactly, and that code change required the local governments to start regulating. That was the beginning. And so you're 100% right.
And just, we are having the discussion, Karen and I were discussing this yesterday afternoon. There's the development rights, like you said, you don't want to require 2 development rights for one type of development. There's the use regulations, which on STRs, the board met and had a committee and recommended, the full board said, that's more of a local issue on how you regulate, enforce, all that stuff. And the fee we've talked about is, if it's a mitigation fee, we can get that like as a one-shot deal. An ongoing fee gets a little bit outside of her, but we're working on that internally. So we'll bring you a little more refined response in November.
All right, last round, if anyone had anything. And I think one thing I just wanted to say quickly with this discussion, what a Herculean effort this has been among TRPA staff, our city officials, our county officials, the public. It's not easy, but all of you working together is impressive and appreciated. So we're digging in, we're gonna keep going, but thank you for this. It was really, really thorough. Thank you. Karen?
Just finally, I just wanted to make a pitch. Ms. Fastinos brought up the Community Academy. As you're reviewing these documents, if you need any more background information, I would really encourage you to go to tahoeliving.org. Under the Community Academy, we have some short, like 3-minute videos that explain development rights, density, definitions, and then there's also a great video that on stormwater that's a little bit longer, as well as some other videos and other documents that have background information.
Thank you. And can you give the website one more time?
It's www.tahoeliving.org.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. And again, this was information only, so we're not taking any action, but thank you for the discussion today. I have great news for the governing board. We are going to pause for lunch. It's 12:44. Why don't we grab food and come back at 1 o'clock for our next planning matter discussion? So we are adjourned until 1. All right, guys, are we ready to jump back in? Staff? Are we ready? You guys, everybody cool? You guys need some more time to eat? You guys okay? All right, thank you. All right. We are going to restart here. It's 1:04, and we're going to start with agenda item 9A, was a presentation on draft policy recommendations for cultivating community. Oh, nope, 9B, sorry, 9B. Which is briefing on forest health and water quality threshold updates. Information on this item can be found on page 193. As a reminder to the public, this is an item that is informational only. Same to board members, we are just hearing a presentation on this. I would like to turn it over to staff, please.
Thanks, Madam Chairwoman, members of the board. Dan Segan, TRPA staff for the record, and I'm joined by Mason Bindle for this presentation. Next slide, please. So we are briefing you today on proposed updates to the water quality and forest health threshold standards. And those are just 2 parts of our system. You know, we have threshold standards in 10 categories. And we've heard a lot of discussion throughout the threshold update process about looking at the thing as Tahoe as an entire system and the interrelationship between, bless you, our forest health and the health of our watersheds, what happens on the land makes it to the water, and the entire system. And I wanted to assure you that we do view it as an entire system. We take it to you in pieces that it's more manageable both for us and the scientists that support us to update those standards. Next slide, please. So to orient you to today's presentation, so I'm going to be talking about the water quality updates, which really fall into this administrative category of threshold updates. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then I'll turn it over to Mason to talk about more substantive updates to the content of our forest health threshold standards. Next slide, please. So this division between administrative updates and substantive updates is something that dates back to 2017, when we first started this current initiative to update the threshold standards. And what we did at the time is we engaged the Science Advisory Council to do a review of other natural resource management systems and provide us with guidance on how we should revise our system to best support the goals that we have, as well as provide you with the information you need to make decisions relative to achieving progress towards those goals. And the first thing they had us do was an assessment of our existing standards. So at the time, we had a bit over 170 standards. If you remember, I think some of you were on the board at the time. And we went through this painful process where we had 5 criteria against which we rated each of our standards as to how well they lived up to those criteria. And the criteria is sort of like the idealized version of a standard: specific, measurable, outcome-based, rooted in the latest science. Next slide, please. And so we did that, and just long story short, none of our standards really lived up to that, the ideal criteria. And we recognized that it was going to be a process to get there. You don't update all of your threshold standards overnight. These are broad goals for the entire basin to work towards. And as we bring forward any of these updates, they're the product of numerous conversations with other members of the Tahoe partnership that are implementing the projects that also drive towards these. But as a first step after that report, you may remember that this board adopted those criteria as what would guide future threshold standards and how we would formulate those standards. And we highlighted 3 main things that we wanted to achieve there. We wanted each standard to be specific, measurable, and outcome-based. And so I'm going to start from the bottom of that list. Outcome-based means we want to be focused on the thing that we really want to achieve, not the action we're trying to implement tomorrow or our interim goal, but we want it focused on our broad goals: a healthy forest, a clear lake. And specific and measurable relate to, at the time our initial standards were adopted in 1982, many of the standards just expressed broad aspirations without numeric targets against which we could each evaluate how we were doing. And as a result of that, if you were on our board in the mid 80s or early 90s, you would have heard complaints from the public saying these evaluations of where we stand relative to the standards are subjective in nature. They're not objective. We can't tell if you've done enough. And so we put it upon ourselves to set specific and measurable targets for all of our goals so that anyone in this room, anyone that's listening online, can clearly see where we stand relative to those goals. So next slide, please. So we adopted those goals, and then we immediately reached back out to the council, because when you have 100 some odd standards and less than a quarter of them live up to even the specific measurable version of this, you need some help to try to get there. And so we engaged them, or at least we did. Maybe some of you could have gotten it on your own. We needed some additional assistance relative to where do we go from here? And they put forward this, I would say it sounds very simple, but it's hard in practice. So they said, where your current standards identify strategies or tactics, recast them as performance measures. And they basically said, these things aren't goals. And they walked through this framework, which you actually saw referenced in public comment, called the GOST framework: goals, objectives, strategies, and tactics. And they said goals are how you explain what you're doing to a layman. An objective is how you quantify that goal for everyone in the room, so we all know what we're talking about. Strategy is a group of things that we do to try to achieve that goal. So for instance, for water clarity, we try to reduce pollutant load. And then tactics are the individual things we do on a day-to-day basis that help drive towards that goal. Requiring BMPs for projects, street sweeping, all these things that we do individually to reduce pollutant load. And what the council observed was that we had a lot of things that were actually strategies and tactics included in our threshold standards. And so they made the simple recommendation, which was basically, hey, keep monitoring these. They're incredibly important to know, but they're not your ultimate goals, so they shouldn't be threshold standards. So get rid of them. Next slide, please. And in total, so at the time, we had 41 water quality standards. That would have removed 31 of those standards. So it's a fairly large change on its surface to our system. Next slide, please. And we considered that proposal. Oh, there you go. So we have a threshold update initiative stakeholder working group that considered that proposal. And the image on the screen that you see, and I apologize to people featured in the image, It's from the early days of COVID, and we're still all getting our legs underneath ourselves for how to do Zoom meetings. Some of us didn't even have our cameras on for most of the meeting. So we considered that proposal just over 4 years ago now. And the committee said, we like most of the proposal and broadly endorse it, but we'd like you to bring back some additional information so that we can assure ourselves and the general public that we're not losing anything by making these changes. And so we've compiled that information, and we have a meeting again of the Threshold Update Initiative Stakeholder Working Group, where we'll be going back through the detailed proposal on how we recast those tactics and strategies as something other than threshold standards. And that meeting, excuse me, is next month. And then we hope to bring back to you a recommendation from them and the Science Council to a future meeting. We're targeting January. And with that, I will turn it over to Mason to talk through the forest health work.
Thanks, Dan. Good afternoon, Chair, members of the board. For the record, Mason Bindle with TRPA's Science and Data Team. As Dan mentioned, I'm here today to talk to you about our work to create new forest health threshold standards, a priority you all set at your last strategic planning retreat. As we all know, forests are underpinning of all of the things in our environment: water quality, soil conservation, scenic values, recreation opportunities, wildlife habitat. And we know those forests are changing. They're vulnerable to drought, insects and disease outbreak, and catastrophic wildfire. So this effort, we aim to update our threshold system to get in line with the actions and goals of our environmental improvement program and use the best available science to ensure that we have forests for Tahoe's future. Next slide, please. So how did we get here? The forests we see today in Tahoe are a product of our recent past. The Comstock era of the late 1800s saw our old growth log to support the mines in Virginia City. And then what came back grew back all at once and came of age during the fire suppression era, where the goals were to put out every fire before the next morning. That reduced the fire on the landscape and eliminated the thinning and renewal that fire played in the process as a role of our fire adapted ecosystems that existed for millennia before we showed up. So the forests, over time, fuels built up and they lost their ability to maintain that balance. The result, overcrowded, less diverse, and more water stressed forests became more vulnerable to that drought, insects, and catastrophic wildfire. So our standards need to evolve from simply preserving forests to building resilience and restoring the processes that shape them. Next slide, please. So the Angora fire was a turning point for the basin in 2007. It burned through neighborhoods we thought were safe, and we lost over 200 homes in a matter of hours. We saw firsthand how quickly wildfire can move from the forest into our communities. And the moment changed Tahoe's perspective on fire, from a distant threat to a shared responsibility. It sparked the collective effort to restore forest health and protect our public safety. So next slide, please. So post-Angora, state and local leaders formed the Emergency Bi-State Fire Commission. Those recommendations that came from that commission formed the policy reforms that TRPA and others adopted across the basin. We saw TRPA streamline permitting for fuels reduction to get the work done faster. We signed memorandums of understanding with our major land managers to align the actions and effectively cut the green tape. Tree removal rules were updated to focus on forest health, and code revisions allowed modern equipment to effectively manage forests on steeper slopes. Those steps marked Tahoe's shift from reactive policy to proactive collaboration. Next slide, please. So our current vegetation standards are one of the last pieces of our policy framework that need to be updated in wake of the Angora fire and Caldor fire. So the current standards date back to 1982, and they sit under the vegetation preservation category. They were designed to protect what existed at the time, not manage for change, essentially a static view of our forests. And we know now that forests are dynamic systems shaped by disturbance and renewal. So the existing standards have been critiqued as incomplete, with little emphasis on forest structure, density, or how fire behaves. And meanwhile, our EIP partners have modernized the way that they work on fuels reduction, forest restoration, and have updated their policies. So this update is about modernizing our threshold system so it aligns with the work and that policy shift, and setting specific measurable standards that'll leverage the recent science and the best management practices for forest health we're seeing on the ground. Next slide, please. So while we were working to update our code to facilitate best management practices in forest health, many other groups were working to define what a resilient forest looks like in Tahoe and across the Sierra. In the 2016 Lake Tahoe Basin Land Management Plan outlined desired conditions for the Forest Service. The 2019 Lake Tahoe West Landscape Restoration Strategy and the Tahoe Central Sierra Initiative's 2021 Pillars of Resilience all define what desired conditions for a healthy forest look like. So we want to align with that work and engage with the Tahoe Science Advisory Council to run a formal review of our proposal. And so the new proposed standards are going to focus on forest structure and potential fire behavior using that clear measurable guidance. Next slide, please. So building on that science, we're developing two main categories of standards: forest structure and fire dynamics. Forest structure describes the forest condition, tree density, canopy cover, and the distribution of size classes across our landscape. Fire dynamics is going to describe how fire behaves when it shows up, both within the wildland-urban interface defense zone and across the general forests. Together, these categories are going to set targets for a structure of the forest and the process that shapes it. As I mentioned earlier, our current system doesn't reflect fire outcomes. This update aims to change that. We plan to recognize fire behavior as central to both public safety and ecosystem resilience. This will align our basin-wide effort to prepare Tahoe for the fires we know will come. Next slide, please. So forest structure, the first category. We're going to describe how trees are spaced, how the canopy is arranged, and how those tree sizes are distributed across the landscape. On the left, you see an overcrowded stand in that image, dense, stressed, vulnerable to the drought, insect, disease, and catastrophic wildfire. The tree ring graphic shows the same pattern: decades of slow growth during the fire exclusion era, followed by rapid growth after management action opened up that forest. In forestry, structure drives everything: growth, vigor, drought and insect resistance, and how fire behaves. So the stakes are real, right? In 2023, we saw 1.6 million trees die across 60,000 acres on the West Shore in these overstock stands you see here: drought stress, starve for water. So we're proposing two structure standards to address the issue: serial stage and canopy cover, which will describe that distribution of size classes across the landscape, as well as the openness of the canopy we desire; and stand density, which will literally be the number of trees we hope to have per stand by forest type. So together, these standards will provide a framework to track our progress toward that open and resilient forest we know we need to have. Next slide, please. So the second category focuses on fire dynamics. Here, we're setting two different standards for the two main management zones our partners have fire objectives for. The wildland-urban interface defense zone is the area around our homes and evacuation routes, depicted here in orange. We want to avoid conditions that create high severity wildfire at all costs in that area, right? We want to be able to manage fire in that area. We saw this firsthand in the Caldor fire when the 100-foot flames came down on the Myers community. But then as they encountered the shaded fuel break that the Forest Service had put in place, the flames came out of the canopy, dropped to the forest floor. Our firefighters were able to engage that fire and shepherd it safely around our homes, protecting our life and property. The other standard we're proposing will be set for the general forest and the wildland-urban interface threat zone. That's the area depicted here in green. This is the area where fires often initiate. And here we want to avoid large stand replacing events from catastrophic wildfire. So we understand fire can and will happen, but we want to avoid the large swath of fire that we saw, particularly in the Caldor fire, where we had 5,000 acres burn at high severity. You see that the impacts of that in the image on the left, where the soils have been sterilized, seed sources lost, erosion impacts will be adverse. Fire, the fire that occurred here, it'll cause the regeneration of that forest to struggle. So the goal here really isn't fire-free forests, it's fire-adapted forests, forests that can withstand fire, regenerate, and persist into the future. So that's the high-level overview of the two categories and the four standards. With that, I'll hand it back to Dan to talk about next steps in the process for refining and adopting this work.
Thanks, Mason. So this is October. So the things that you see going on right now, this is an initial briefing for you, just to orient you on the direction that we're headed. Mason and colleagues are currently working with the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team. That's the team that actually implements projects on the landscape, to review the targets that we're setting and come up with the overall goals and implementation measures to get to that goal. In November, the Tahoe Science Advisory Council is going to be doing a peer review of the standards that are being proposed. So we'll bring that back to you. We also have the Threshold Update Initiative Stakeholder Working Group, which will get the 2-hour version of the 10-minute presentation that you just heard and dive deep into the standards as part of their review. Throughout November and December, we're also coordinating with the EIP partners who these standard updates will also affect to ensure that they are aligned and these new standards represent their goals for where they would like to see the landscape head. We'll also be briefing the Advisory Planning Commission and then hopefully coming back to you for a recommendation to adopt the standards in January of 2026. And with that, I thank you all for your time and would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions or comments? We'll go around. I see. Go ahead, Brooke.
I paid attention this time. This particular topic, I'm just seeing so many different, everyone's frantically running around trying to do something and everyone's doing it differently. The utility company in particular, I would be very harsh on. From my own experience, they're caring for their lines, but they don't care about what they do to the land after they drop these trees. And they also don't drop them with any kind of knowledge as to what the forest looks like, for example, in spring runoff. So on Forest Service land, Liberty Energy had a contract and they came in and they just started dropping everything within 20 feet of a line, every which way. And then they leave the timber. I mean, it's so uncoordinated. Like the standard by which we would hold everyone who touches the forest to the same standard. So we're all doing the same thing, but we're not. The Forest Service, you mentioned the Caldor fire, and that a lot of credit due to the fact that they did a big forest thinning in there, but you know, they haven't been back in 15 years. You should see what it looks like now. It looks really bad. So I still feel like we're all running around like chickens with our heads cut off, and we all think we're doing something, but nobody's doing anything in lockstep or with similar priorities and goals of what we leave behind. I think some of the stuff that's on the ground is just as dangerous to the power lines as the tree that was standing there. And they're dropping 140, 200-year-old trees. You know, so at what point, like, how are we really thinking about this? There doesn't seem to be a rhyme or a reason the way I look at it, just as a resident.
Madam Chair, do you want us to jump in as we go around?
Please.
Okay. I'm going to invite Kat McIntyre, Dr. McIntyre up to talk about that. But appreciate the comment, Member Lane. Absolutely. You know, my neighborhood is in the Caldor zone as well. Never want to go through anything like that again. I can understand why it may look like that. I would say, having worked in this space now for 30 years in Tahoe, we are getting so much better. I mean, if it feels that way now, imagine what it was before Angora, you know, in the very early days of the Tahoe Regreen project in the 90s, when we really started at that tree mortality issue in the 7-year drought period that broke around, you know, 1993. So I want Kat to talk about the work with the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team and the MAC, and there is coordination going on. I will say we can strengthen it with the Utility Corridors project, because Kat personally has worked a lot with the utilities. There's more work to do on that, but you know, NV Energy has been doing a lot on the Nevada side. The companion piece of that, Kat served on the National Forest Task Force, National Task Force. So she had some insights to share from that experience as well. But there is a lot of coordination going on. And maybe what I'll do is ask Kat just to jump in to give a summary of some of the things that might be relevant to your comments.
Never mind, sorry.
hitting the wrong button, PhD. Hi, everyone. Kat McIntyre, TRPA for the record. So yeah, great comments. And I do want to just say we take that very seriously. The Liberty, we've heard, you're not the first to bring up some issues with the Liberty Resilience Corridor, is what I will say. So what I can also say is Forest Service is not here. They were invited. However, with like it being pushed later into the day, they had other meetings. We're happy to coordinate with them and talk to them about their contractor and what they're doing out there. They are under the Resilience Corridor allowed to clear pretty much down to bare mineral soil for that 20-foot swath. So that is not abnormal for them to be clearing all the trees. But what the concerns you're raising are valid and real. So I'm happy to work with the Forest Service to discuss that. In terms of the Caldor fire, I do want to just say there is active work occurring in that footprint currently. So we've got the Caldor fire hazard tree removal project that the Forest Service is doing, which is removing hazard trees within 200 feet of trails, infrastructure, homes, any recreation site. But then also they just released the Caldor Fire Restoration EA. So that'll be kicking off in the next season as well. That is focused more on kind of getting out there, doing watershed restoration, replanting, all of that, what you would typically see in a burn scar. In terms of the larger coordination, TFFT can always be doing more. We coordinate, we meet every other month. We are constantly talking about what are the priorities for the group? What are the priorities at the executive level? How do we want to make sure those get down on the ground? Right now, the 3 key priorities are resilient communities. So that's really focusing on defensible space, home hardening, the built environment. The second one is landscape scale resilience. That's the projects like Lake Tahoe West or the Caldor Fire EA. And then the third one is wildfire response, which kind of gets to what Mason was talking about with the 4-foot flame lengths and wildfire dynamics in the built environment. We produce IAP, an incident action plan, what I would call an annual work plan every year, where we document and kind of line out amongst all implementers, what's the work you're going to be doing, how that fits together. But there is always opportunity to do more, is what I will say. So I think, sorry, that was really fast too.
No, that
if
was
you
great.
have any
And-
additional questions, I'm all ears.
And I know there's other commenters that need to go around the table, but I will add Julie Reagan here to Kat's great explanation. A request maybe to do a briefing with Annabelle. There's a new Tahoe Fire and Fuels Team coordinator. We have never had that as a partnership. I mean, we re-upped the 10-year fuels reduction strategy basin-wide at the summit. And I think there's almost 20 signatories to that. TRPA is a signatory because we helped form this group after Angora. And honestly, our leadership has been very instrumental in supporting the fire service and the work. And it's fallen on our shoulders. First, Mike Vollmer, when he worked at TRPA, now runs the Tahoe Resource Conservation District that supported a lot of the backbone work with the fire service, and then Kat. But we were able to work together as a partnership to fund a position to coordinate the Tahoe Fire and Fuels Team. Annabelle has space in our office. She works here in addition with the Conservation District staff. Love to sit down and do a briefing so you can see all the coordination that's happening, because it is not apparent even to the community. And so what we're trying to do is get more public education around the kind of coordination that is going on and the lessons learned from Angora and Caldor. And the fact that we didn't lose a home in Christmas Valley is still considered a miracle, not because we got lucky, but it was hard work and firefighting that helped move that fire out of the neighborhood, as embers were landing all over the community. So appreciate the question, and we're happy to follow up.
Julie, I do want to just note, Vic Lyon from the Forest Service is online and he has his hand raised. So I think if we want him to field any of those questions specific. Okay.
You can go ahead, Vic.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Victor Lyon, Forest Service on the Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit. I just wanted to share that if the board has any specific questions about what's going on in regards to the Liberty Resilience Corridor or Liberty Special Use Permitted Activities, or the Caldor hazard tree or Caldor restoration proposed activities, I'd be happy to answer those. Specifically, we are in close coordination with both Liberty Utilities and NV Energy, for that matter, managing risk to the power lines or risk coming from the energy infrastructure to the foresting community. And sometimes while there may appear to not be coordination going on, actually behind the scenes there is. I can think of one place I visited after hours on my way home last night, where some residents had contacted us with some concerns, and I went out to look at those and have reached out to our partners and recognized that there are some trees that have been felled out there, but there's a plan to remove them. And I wonder if that might be related to Board Member Lane's earlier comments and questions. So I'd just like to offer to the board, if you have any specific questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Thank you.
Thank you, Vic. Still going around the horn. Other questions or comments, Cindy?
Thank you. I want to thank staff for the work that you're doing. I would agree that the public is dying to do more and doesn't know where to channel their efforts. Community members, individuals in the community. We have a lot of this, like, I'm doing my property, but the neighbors aren't, and all those sorts of things. But on the bigger picture, I feel like it's better than it's ever been in that coordination. And that's just from, my working with the various agencies and hearing how we've mapped and what we're looking at. One of the challenges, it's the Golden Gate Bridge, right? We start at one end, we go all the way around, and we're going to just keep doing this forever because as Supervisor Lane said, we, 3 to 5 years, right? Maybe 5 years up here versus the other side of the hill. I'm looking at a 3-year maintenance cycle for forest thinning projects because the growth, hotter temperatures, less winter, all of that. I did have the opportunity early fall, to do a tour of going back out over the King Fire burn scar that was also a sanitized area that still doesn't have trees on it. How many years ago was King Fire? Yeah, 2015. And so you realize the high intensity fires are so devastating to our ecology. And so anything we can do to and I know that's what we're working on. So I appreciate that. I find it overwhelming just in the amount of money that we are going to have to spend to take care of our forests and needing partners. So we point at utility agencies, and now I'm talking about my whole district because I've got PG&E on the other side, and they're doing the right thing. But it's never to the satisfaction of the homeowner. Homeowner doesn't want to be left with trees, but yet the trees belong to the property, and they're, we're all going to have to come together and realize this is to protect ourselves. If we choose to live in the forest, we're going to have to be part of the solution. And that is going to cost us individually money, local jurisdictions money, and the broader agencies money. So, it's great to have a path forward and to really focus on that public education of what are we doing, meaning we, the collective we, and then what can we do as property owners? Because I think that'll help, at least with the neighbors I have that are going, nothing's being done, yet the Conservancy did a lot of work in our neighborhood just 2 years ago. And it's like they forgot that this was much thicker 2 years ago. But nonetheless, it's a fire danger. And, we do live in a forest, and unless we want it completely denuded, there's going to be fire danger. So how can we best adapt? But I do like the idea of the public education. And I know this is going to be a hot button when we bring it back. But it's so important. And I do think the land tender, vibrant planet maps that we've seen, where we can really not treat the whole forest, but focus on the highest threat areas and protect our communities and protect those resources and infrastructure, are going to be critical to telling the story of how we address this. So thank you for all your efforts.
Still going around and not seeing anyone. Shelley and then Ashley.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. So when you're kind of shifting the focus of the thresholds to structure and fire behavior, does structure include dealing with the homogeneity of the forest and trying to make it more diverse?
Yes, the serial stage and canopy cover will be a distribution and desired condition of the different stages of forest. And we know we're not going to manage for a 100% manicured forest. It's a dynamic system that we are looking to the science to tell us what the desired range of young and old forest should be and how it should be arranged. And the standard will speak to that.
Okay, great, thank you. And Brooke, consider yourself lucky. In Carson City, we have a private contractor who's been employed by Nevada Energy, who just cuts a swath through the canopy of the tree. So it looks like something out of a Dr. Seuss book to provide a certain amount of distance between the leaves of the tree and the wire. So in some respects, it would be better if they just cut the tree down.
Yeah, we have that problem too. I mean, it's all over the place.
Ashley and then Cody.
Thanks so much. And yeah, these are all great comments. I mean, I think one thing we could think about in terms of going beyond the threshold is potentially some of those management standards. So, and potentially showing what it looks like to get the forest into a resilient condition. I think it's hard for the public to imagine, having seen so many overstocked forests, what a resilient forest looks like and what a forest that's been thinned to bring fire to ground looks like. The goal of this treatment is really to take fire out of the understory, bring it to ground where it can be fought on the ground successfully. But to maintain forests as forests. No one wants to see us lose forests and have them turn into meadows and wetlands and then potentially be developed. So the goal is to make sure that we still have these forests for decades to come. So potentially with the threshold work, we could do some sharing of visualizations of what, future looking healthy forest looks like. Additionally, I think there's an opportunity for the council that coordinates all this work to talk about some best management practices more vocally, right? This is what we expect to see on the ground. And then finally, there's so much demand for forest work right now that I think a lot of these folks who are doing the work they're competing for the work and doing it as quickly as they can to try to move on to the next project. And that is part of the reason for that is we don't have a huge amount of personnel, people who can manage heavy equipment, who can go out and do the work. And the great thing is we're funding training programs all over California right now for folks to do this type of work, but it will take time. So the more you can advocate for those types of programs at your community colleges and elsewhere is really helpful. And then last, I'll just say that, funding is an issue and natural resources gets pennies on the dollar at the state level and the national level. And, we've seen a complete defunding of the Forest Service and Department of Interior in the last several months. And so the more we can advocate that, these pennies on the dollar are not enough for actually maintaining health is really important.
Thank you. Cody and then Wes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Very interesting data and good things happening there. I'm curious with the conservation, California conservation, and in the city, we have a lot of lots that are owned by them that are, adjacent to other parcels where our residents are living that we're really pushing on our residents to thin it, but the Conservancy isn't necessarily stepping up. And so what can happen? I mean, I know their mission a lot of times is to fully conserve. And sometimes it's said that they're not managing what they have bought to conserve. And so is there anything that we can do in partnership with them, or what can be done for some of those? Because I think that in a way, those parcels that are not being managed and thinned at the right level are causing more harm to some of the structures that are in the city than almost anything else. So yeah, just curious if there's been any talks with the Conservancy.
Director Reagan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Julie Reagan here, TRPA Executive Director. Thank you, Member Bass, for that question. This comes up a lot. If you recall, when we had our discussion in front of the governing board on evacuation, we actually had representatives from the fire service. The community had a wildfire forum with fire chiefs and various representatives. And I know elected officials often bring this up. So it's a great opportunity to talk about it. The Conservancy and Nevada State Lands and the U.S. Forest Service are managing their lots. They have gone in. I think most of those lots have been treated within the last, let's say, 5 years. There's more to do. It never ends, as Member Gustafson said. But an important fact that the fire chiefs discussed at the fire forum that I think the public, we could use some help in getting the word out. An empty lot is treated in a different way than a developed lot, right? And they were very clear in the forums that the fire danger isn't coming necessarily from Conservancy or Forest Service or state lands parcels, unless there, is a 10-foot wall of pine needles, which generally isn't the case because we go by these lots all day long. They're sprinkled throughout the entire community. They do have more work to do. And if there are issues, people should call, the land management agency. There are good neighbor programs where if you live adjacent to an urban lot of the Forest Service or another land management agency, homeowners can actually enter into agreements to treat them. And so there are a lot of options that can go a long way, but I know that there are limited in funds to maintain those lots, and that is an ongoing battle. It's very expensive to continue that maintenance. The Conservancy has, I think, 5,500 urban lots on the California side. I think the state of Nevada has about 500 and the Forest Service has 3,500. So there are 9,000 parcels that would have probably been developed had it not been for the acquisitions of those very often sensitive parcels. But I know that those land management agencies are doing a really good job with the resources that they have, can always do better, but I'll look to Kim Carringer if there's anything else you wanted to add to that.
Thank you, Director Reagan. Kim Carringer for the record. I think you covered that. I think that I'll add, if that's okay. I think if you remember, as part of our work plan, we elevated forest health and welfare as a strategic priority for TRPA. And we work with the Conservancy, we work with the Forest Service, we work with a lot of partners through the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team to do this work, as everyone's mentioned. But we did elevate that we need to elevate our public communications. And there is the fire pit, that's the public information team for the TFFT. And we've added some horsepower to that committee through our staff and some contracted staff. And I do want to bring an update to the board on all the work that's going on, because I think there's a lot that's happening behind the scenes that you haven't seen yet. So I know Mason and the team has been working on a story map that we can share with the public about this particular item, the forest health threshold update, and a lot of the other work going on. We are thinking about a new website. We have some articles coming up in Tahoe in depth. And then finally, to respond to Member Lane's comments too about the thresholds and how we're all coordinating. Just to bring it back to the thresholds, I think this update is going to help really unite all of us around these goals that and these targets that we all need to drive towards. They're doing that through planning, through coordination on our multi-jurisdictional fuel strategy and all of those, but these are the North Star, right? And they've been out of date. So I think that's going to help of really telling the public and talking to each other about where we all want to be in the next few decades. So I'll end there. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great,
Wes?
thanks. Oh, well.
Hey, Cody, can I come back for a couple more?
Yeah, that's fine. No worries. Yeah.
Thank you. Wes?
Thank you. I just wanted to throw some kudos out there for Tahoe Douglas. They have been out here tending our forests for at least 10 years now. And they come by with the shredder and anything that you have piled up for them, they shred and get off of your property. Back when I moved here, I hate to sound like a dinosaur, but 30 some years ago when we moved here, we had what was called a fire safe council, and it was federally funded. And they took lay people and taught us how to fire safe a property and how to put different colored ribbons on different parts of the property. And they would come in and clean out all of the runs that they would have for the fire to spread. And that worked so well. And I was really sorry to see that go away. But one of the things I do want to say is that Tahoe Douglas is working with the homeowners. They're cleaning up Forest Service land. And if Chief Lindgren has his way, we'll soon have a firefighting helicopter that is stationed right here in Douglas County to respond to any area within minutes in the basin to put out fires before they spread. So that would be a great day. And if any of the other agencies have money laying around, the chief could sure use some money to get those doggone helicopters. Thank you.
Thanks, Wes. Was anyone else on first round of comments? I did, and then Cody, I'll circle back in just a sec here. I did just want to thank everyone, and I think the study came out in September, but it sort of piggybacks off something that Cindy had said. CAL FIRE study out in September found that homes with fire hardening standards were 40% less likely to be destroyed, 32% less likely to be damaged. Clearing the 5-foot parameter around your home doubled the number of homes that survive a blaze, and only one single hardening measure implemented by a homeowner can reduce damage by 20%. If you do a comprehensive within 5 feet parameter, you get up to 74% likelihood that your home survives. So something that I keep hearing about in the utility space is when we think about these wildfires, we think we have to start thinking more about the urban conflagrations. I know Tahoe's not urban, but it's people's yards, people's yards, people's yards, people's yards. And how do we work together? That makes such a difference in whether your home stands or not. Not to mention health of the forest around people's yards, but this is going to require us working with homeowners. So thanks for pointing that out. Circling back to Cody.
You actually really just touched on what I was going to talk about, which was home hardening and kind of, are we looking at even, I don't know if there's benefits to adding, if somebody will home harden, a new project, that we give them some type of benefit. I don't know. I just think that home hardening is such an important key of this. And when we look at protecting structures in the urban interface, everything that we're building going forward should be using the best materials we know, and also so many other dynamics of what home hardening is. But yes, I couldn't agree more that we need to figure out how to create benefits for people that go in that direction, because it might not always be like the most aesthetically
Hey, Cody, we're losing you. We just lost the last sentence. Sorry, it sounds like your connection's. We heard
sorry,
everything.
I'm driving, but I think so yeah, I think we're good to go. I'm driving over the summer right now, so yes, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Please.
If I may just
Reagan.
wrap us up. Thank you, Madam Chair. And really great questions, great discussion. We're going to fold this in just to kind of reorient you to where Dan wrapped up. This is a pretty aggressive timeline, but work has been going on for years. And I wanted to thank Kim for mentioning our strategic priorities and the work plan. Like, you tasked us with moving on these thresholds. And so water quality and forest health are two individual highlighted strategic priorities. We're bringing this to you. We want to get these done. It will reflect best science and advance our goals. And I think collectively as a partnership, this is something we can rally around. I also want to invite you to go to Tahoe Living with Fire, because there's a whole additional information of all that's being done, all that you can do. Fire adapted communities, fire wise communities are just sprouting all throughout the community. I think we probably have more per capita in the Tahoe Basin than the two states, because our communities are rallying around this. And it very much is a combination of home hardening, forest health, readiness, all of the evacuation preparations that we've talked about. And there is work going on in the evacuation corridors, and the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team have made that a super high priority. If you haven't driven down Pioneer Trail lately, look at part of that work. That's an evacuation corridor. The 28 and 50 corridors are underway. And I have a couple of more examples to give you in my report. So I just appreciate the discussion.
Thanks, Julie. And Shelley has one more.
Along the lines of repopulating the forest, I understand the ponderosa pine, which has thrived in Western forests for generations, has the ability, kind of an unusual ability, to survive fire. And I'm just wondering, is there any genetic work being done to alter the genetics of some of these trees. So they mimic the ponderosa pine, which survives because of the thickness of the bark on the tree.
Hi, everyone. Kat McIntyre, TRPA for the record. There is work, not in the basin, but elsewhere there that looks at the genetic makeup of different trees, how trees are going to migrate due to climate change, what we should be putting in place. There's work on selectively choosing traits of certain trees, like for example, rust resistant sugar pines and white pines. They actually actively identify which cones are rust resistant. And then those are the cones that they propagate and then go and plant those babies because they'll be the ones that survive. So that type of research does exist. So we don't typically we have a subspecies of ponderosa pine, the Jeffrey pine. And what we're seeing, this area is called the pine belt, essentially. So down on the western slope, we're actually seeing the ponderosa pine will actually start to struggle as climate changes, and they're going to continue to march up the mountain. Eventually, they're going to have nowhere to march. So that's all to say that does exist. It's not something that we're actively searching out in the basin right now.
All right. Thank you all very much for this discussion.
Madam Chair, can I just give a special thank you to Mason? Mason is usually behind the computer on the GIS and doing all of his visualizations, but he's really stretched into this policy space and really did a great job today. So thanks, Mason, and thanks, Dan.
Mason, we don't bite. Come back anytime.
I'll be back in January.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. With that, again, this was an informational only item. So let's move on then to agenda item 10, which is reports. Director Reagan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Julie Reagan, TRPA Executive Director. Just a couple of slides because we are pretty close to wrapping this meeting up, and I thank you for your attention. Just wanted to look at this absolutely gorgeous photograph. Sarah Underhill, our communications director, has a budding photographer's son, Cedar, who took that shot with the recent snow on the gold leaves of the aspen and this beautiful bird. So I have been loving the fall that we've been having. It's one of the most beautiful I can recall in years. I hope you are too. Reminds us how special this beautiful area is that we want to protect. And thanks for your collective service in that vein. The next slide is something I mentioned in an email to you, but just in case you missed that, we recently published our TRPA column, our opinion column in the regional papers around the student housing project of the Lake Tahoe Community College. A huge shout out to the college, many members of Team Tahoe, the city of South Lake Tahoe, on and on. Brandy McMahon, our staffer, moved heaven and earth to partner with the college because they had a big infusion of state funds to move ahead with a 100-bed housing project that we approved faster, I want to say, than any other community college in the state of California. We've set a new record for once they got the award of the funding from the state, to getting this project completed. So in 2 construction seasons, in Tahoe was almost a miracle, but miracles don't happen by accident in Tahoe. It's Team Tahoe all the way. Jeff Cowan is a proud trustee. He's a member of the board of trustees of the community college. So he and I got to celebrate with that fine group that's pictured. If you want to take a look at these, I would definitely Google Jeff DeFranco, the president of the college, has a kind of like an MTV Cribs kind of video debut on YouTube, kind of walking room by room in the college dorms. And they are nice. They are beautiful. The view is incredible, far superior than any of our college freshman year dorms, I can say. So take a look, but it's part of a whole strategy to make housing more affordable. And that's 100 folks that won't be looking for housing in the community. They are income qualified students in California. So big accomplishment for our community. Was proud to be a part of it. Next slide. We're going to talk just a little wrap up of the last presentation. We covered a lot of ground. I won't rehash, but the one thing we didn't get into too much detail is Lake Tahoe West. Some of you who have been on the board for a while will remember there's been a very big science policy coordination initiative around thinning the 60,000 acres of forest on the West Shore. And we know right now that there are about 50% mortality of those trees. All you have to do is drive around. I'm sure Vince just did this morning, and you look around right at the edge of Highway 89, looking up for us, we have huge dead and dying trees on the West Shore. So right before the government shutdown, the Forest Service signed the decision to move ahead with the federal lands, which is about 45,000 acres. So really important project that will be able to get underway under some provisions from legislation that allow them to just move forward in an expedited way. So that is happening, and that is done in coordination with TRPA and with our partners and the Conservancy and the community, and it's a high priority, and we have funding to move ahead to do that. And the benefit of our partnership and Team Tahoe is that we have put hundreds of millions of dollars of federal and state and local and private funds into forest health projects, and this will be a high priority of that Tahoe Fire and Fuels team going forward. So a big thank you to Kat McIntyre, who was just speaking, and Kim and Mason, Shannon Friedman from our staff, Beth Bulmer, our communications team. Once that work gets underway, you can bet people that maybe weren't as engaged in that will instantly go, what's going on? So help us spread the word that this is critical forest health and ecosystem restoration work, that it's not a clear cutting process, but it's a huge priority for us to get some progress on the West Shore. Because if Caldor had turned and gone up the side of the West Shore to the North Shore, we may have had a very different outcome than what we did in losing no homes and no lives. So the next item on there, let's go back one, sorry, just a couple other bullets. The fire aside defensible space software. This is really exciting. We are automating defensible space inspections. Historically, we, as you saw in Mason's slide, after Angora, we developed MOUs, agreements with the fire districts for them to go out and mark trees. TRPA's forester, Bruce Barr, is a machine, but he doesn't have to go out and mark every forest health threat tree. We now have agreements with the fire professionals. There's a new software that they're using that automates that. They used to do paper, tablet, hard copies. It was not automated in any way. Now there's new software that all the fire districts are using, and it ties in with our tree removal, so we can actually track that. We count that in a performance measure for the environmental improvement program. So we're not having to manually enter all of that, and we're very much tied in with Bruce and the fire service to get more compliance on the ground, because the more easier we can make it for the homeowner to do, the more chances that they will. And we have regulations around defensible space in both states. So progress there. And then we're also, as Kim mentioned, amping up our education around tree removal, because we have had a lot of new homeowners coming into the basin in the last 5 years post-COVID, and people aren't familiar with the rules around trees and how it can be easy for them to do defensible space on their properties, achieve that we call it the 5-foot moat that our board chair just mentioned around your house, 5 feet of rock and non-combustible service, structure. So a lot of work is underway to get out the word in social media and Tahoe in depth. We have new opinion columns going out and a whole new communications platform that's going to be launching really soon. So elevating that work and building in the update of our standards as part of the notification to the community to make sure that they are heard in this process over the next couple months. Okay, we'll take the next slide. Really exciting statistics here because we have officially wrapped up the boating season. There's a couple launch sites open in winter, Cave Rock, Lake Forest on the North Shore, but most of the boat ramps are closed, and usually the snow seals the deal, so people aren't in boating mindset anymore. But just take a look at some of those stats. I won't go through all of them. I think the takeaway is that our education campaign worked. We only intercepted one golden mussel, which is the new critter that we're keeping out of here. Even though they are moving rapidly around the West, we did not find but one, and we decontaminated, and we have had no evidence that anything slipped by us. We intercepted some other invasives, and we had a major uptick in decontaminations, because you all remember we moved ahead with a very aggressive policy to decontaminate every visiting boat. So we feel like that education effort is working with our partners. lots of partners, the Tahoe Fund, the League to Save Lake Tahoe, the new roving inspectors, one who we honored today in the Lake Spirit Awards, all hands on deck to keep the golden mussels and the quagga mussels out and to manage the existing species that we have. And since 2008, since we launched this program, 123,000 watercraft inspected. It's just unbelievable. And the partnership with the Resource Conservation District is essential to that Team Tahoe goal to protect the lake. We only know we'll have more threats as the warming temperatures increase in the lake. That makes it more hospitable to invasive species. So we have to remain very, very vigilant on that. And then just a couple more things and I'll wrap it. But we have had some legislative, take the next slide, activity. You know, I've had a lot of questions about the shutdown. You know, just for your understanding, the Forest Service locally, about 80% of that staff is still working. They have an account that they can use to pay staff. So they're not working for no pay. They are getting paid the 80%. Because unfortunately, this is, you know, happening more frequently, and they've been able to make some provisions to deal with these short-term situations. Not ideal because everything is slowing down. Even though they're 80% staff, they have a lot of staff that are administrative that aren't working, and they're in that 20%. So an agreement that we need to do for the new EIP project, the trail that's from Meeks Bay to Bliss, which is the next Tahoe Trail segment, we're ready to get going on that. And we have Restoration Act funds to do it, but they don't have the staff to execute the paperwork. So there are some effects, but we're working through it, and our partners are, you know, going through a lot right now. And we're trying to be a support for the Forest Service. But anyhow, work is underway. Most of the rec sites have been closed for the season. So that was actually, in terms of timing, didn't have as much of an impact to us as it might have to other areas weather-wise. We have a new Nevada Oversight Legislative Committee in the interim that's being chartered and will most likely start in the first of the year. We have a couple new members. Our chair this year is Assemblymember Golding from Reno. Senator Daley, who was the chair last interim, is going to be our vice chair. And we have Senators Titus and Scheibel joining the committee, Assemblymember Watts, DeLong, and Zermano Moore. So we have a couple more members than usual. The charter changed, and we'll be gearing up to educate that committee. And there'll be a series of meetings throughout next year. And I know many of you were supportive of us and came to the legislature, came here to TRPA to hear the presentations, and we'll invite you to do the same, because that committee is very key in shepherding policies through the legislature or just helping us fight for our budget in Carson City. And Shelley, you've been a stalwart supporter of those meetings and coming to support us in the budget negotiations, and we appreciate it, and we'll keep you posted. And then there's just new legislation in California. The legislature passed and the governor signed AB 149 at the end of the session, which allocated $20 million to the golden mussel response statewide. And we are making sure our programs are competitive because education is expensive. Historically, agencies are under-resourced for public engagement education, things like billboards that are very expensive. So we're hoping that we can fight for more dollars to up the game on the education front as well to combat that threat of golden mussels. And then just in the next couple of months, what's coming up? Oh no, we have one more slide on pretty neat hap that I wanted to tell you about. We had a taco truck in the back parking lot and we invited all of our building neighbors here at TRPA. I don't think it's ever been done. You know, we lease space to an electrician, the Tahoe Rim Trail. We have the GSA, we have the Tahoe Transportation District, we have Design Workshop, we have many different tenants that help us support this very large building. And we just had a staff gathering and had a taco truck out back, and they really appreciated that opportunity to network and meet each other. We see each other in the parking lot every day, and sometimes it's there's not a lot of familiarity with what work they're doing and how we can support each other as partners. So that was a staff development day after an all-staff meeting, and getting our partners in was really fun. And then when we send our staff to conferences, we come back and ask for a learning opportunity. We have something called the Learning Lab every month, where we sit down right in this room with our staff and we pick a topic. and we learn and grow and we break things down. We go through lessons learned. And so this week, we actually had reports from the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations Conference back in Rhode Island. And that is Kira and Rebecca right there. Nick Haven is on the national board of what we call MPOs, those Metropolitan Planning Organizations. There's more than 400 MPOs in the country. Of course, we got a special dispensation, even though our population isn't large enough to be one. In federal law, we are an MPO. So it was great to hear all the challenges in transportation, a little commiserating with some of the things that we're dealing with in other places in the country. But importantly, that group is going to be very influential for the authorization, the new reauthorization of the federal highway bill. That is kicking off in the Congress next year if we can get back to work. So that was key and pivotal, and they gave a great presentation on things they learned. And the Mountain Planners Summit up in Whistler, British Columbia, that was Kim and Devin and Alyssa and Kat. And that was really informative. Resort planners from around the country and Canada gathered and talked a lot about affordable housing. They'd had a huge fire in Jasper and how, a third of the community burned down in one fire. All kinds of trails and learnings around interpretive signage, working with your Indigenous communities to educate around your trail network, infrastructure. They had the Olympics and they got infrastructure as part of it, but they had a plan and a vision. And when the Olympics came, they leveraged all of that to get this infrastructure. Their average sales price is like $3.5 million. So, we didn't feel so bad with the cost of living in Whistler, but they are very bullish on having workforce housing in their community. And they gave us some ideas of things that we could do differently here. And then I'll point out the coming up, we've covered most of November's. We do, the one thing we haven't discussed is the IPES, Placer County, the individual parcel evaluation score. Placer is the only county that hasn't gone down to the score of 1 for building to get qualifying for an allocation for building. We're going to be talking about that at the November committee meeting. And then in December, our audit, our performance reviews, shoreline amendments. We have Van Sickle, a project to bring you, which will be really in that vein of sustainable infrastructure for resort recreation. We have our annual holiday lunch, and the NTRPA will also meet. So that concludes my report. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director Reagan. Next up is Graham. Any general counsel status report?
Yeah, just a very quick update, litigation update, hopefully to close the loop on this. As you recall, I just periodically inform you of litigation facing the agency. We were named in a slip and fall case that the old Hard Rock Casino, it's not old, it's now the Golden Nugget. And TRPA was named last year in that lawsuit, probably because it's not really clear, because we issued the permit probably that was related to where this individual hurt herself. And personal injury firm down in Las Vegas was suing the agency. We successfully got the agency dismissed from that case because of improper service. And so it was we litigated on briefs, and I was really proud of the work that Jack Mensick did in our office to help put together those arguments and get that case dismissed for now. So that for us, and they continue with their own thing, but the agency is not involved.
Thank you. That brings us to agenda item 11, which is governing board member reports. Any governing board members have anything to report this month? All right, committees, agenda item 12. Any committees have anything to report? Online, nope. Okay, that brings us to our final agenda item. This is our general public interest comment period. Any member of the public wishing to address the governing board on any item listed or not listed on the agenda may do so at this time. Individual comments will be limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Written comments received by 4 p.m. yesterday were forwarded to board members. And we will hear as many individual comments as we can for up to an hour of public comment this afternoon. Is there anyone in the room wishing to make public comment? No one is coming forward. And Catherine, could you please call online? I see a few hands raised.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me. 3 hands are raised so far. The first hand up is Alan Miller. Alan, please unmute to make your comment.
Hi, I'm Alan Miller, civil and environmental engineer and an advocate for the law with an extensive regulatory background. I shared written comments calling for the city of South Lake Tahoe city council members and senior city officials to resign and spoke before the city council last night. Others called for resignations also because of a crisis of mistrust of the public officials in our community. They are right not to trust anyone in government, especially any agency associated with TRPA, the greatest fraud of any. I testified because of criminal conspiracies, misuse of city funds, resources, and property to subsidize your permit activity. There is tremendous fraud associated with TRPA's Memorandum of Understanding with the city for area plans, through which TRPA has violated the compact, state law, and the California and federal constitutions, and stolen my civil rights and those of others in collusion with the city. Theft is kind of a big topic on the South Shore in recent weeks, but this has been going on for years to the detriment of Lake Tahoe. Further, TRPA has turned my city into a cheap hoe with the permit appeals set up in the MOU and making my city planning commission your hearings officer for TRPA permits. There are too many violations of law with that to even go into here. The TRPA regulations are coercive and have stolen my city's autonomy and self-determination, and I do not consent. And since the city council has chosen to support the criminal agreement with TRPA over city code and their oaths, I figure they're of no use to the people in the city. If they can't or won't follow the law, they have no business being in government. That's why I asked them to resign. The same goes for all of you criminal conspirators behind these illegal agreements. You can resign also. I spoke to you about this last April and May, and I told you this issue with the California MOUs and area plans is not going away. I'll keep pushing the matter until people finally understand the corruption of state and local government you have achieved in the region with your MOUs for implementing area plan requirements. It's an illegal charade, city pretending to be TRPA. That must end because it's also destroying Lake Tahoe and its water quality with deficient environmental reviews, even worse than what TRPA does, which I hardly thought possible. Permitting efficiencies to efficiently destroy the region and Lake Tahoe water quality is what your MOU program has wrought. TRPA must do its own work and city can't legally do it for you. The city has its own work to do. Stop turning my city into your subservient hoe and the public officials into criminal conspirators against the people. Junk the illegal MOUs in California and Nevada doesn't use. That makes almost all of this illegal, unconstitutional nonsense go away. The solution is so simple, it takes a committed criminal not to see it. This isn't over. I reiterate my petition to you of last March and April. Comply with the compact and junk the horrible, sovereignty-stealing Marchetta Marshall MOUs.
And we're at 3 minutes. Thank you.
The next hand raised is Ann Nichols. Ann, please unmute to make your comment.
Yeah, hi again. Yes, I just wanted to clear up with Vince this thing. I just got an email from Ken Cashman at TRPA regarding the cumulative accounting report, and there's 6.4 million square feet of existing CFA. And you can convert that to TAUs at 300 square feet per CFA. So that's thousands of units that could be converted. In theory, you would have to remove, restore, and bank the existing uses. But the great failure in this, and I wish you would fix this first before you start creating additive development, is fix this conversion rate, because one TAU often becomes a 6,000 square foot condo penthouse. It isn't equivalent. And you don't need a development right. So there's 1,000 or so that could be converted right now without a development right. So when you talk about, we have this cap on development, let's see the real numbers. Just be transparent. Thank you.
And the last hand raised is Melissa Soderston. Melissa, please unmute to make your comment.
Yes, good afternoon, Melissa Soderston, South Lake Tahoe. And I again want to say it's disappointing that we're not given an opportunity for proper engagement during the presentations of these issues. We should be able to comment after the issue is presented before you as the board respond. That being said, I urge you to reject entirely this notion of forest health and resilience. To even infer that you can define what a healthy forest is nonsense. Forests are constantly in flux and constantly changing. We have heard numerous times how logging and fire suppression is what got our forests into this state that they are in, and yet those are the only solutions that you seem willing to offer. We really need to reject this notion of forest health and stop thinning the forest. It is not improving forest health. There is no way to tell which trees are going to survive climate change, are going to be most resilient to drought, fire, beetle infestations, fungal infections. We cannot determine that, and it is egregious to be logging any tree at this point, knowing how many we are losing. Even extreme fire is a natural part of an ecosystem. Even stand replacing fire is a natural part of our ecosystems. Bark beetles are a natural part of our ecosystems. Dead trees are the life building blocks of the forest. They are essential to the health of the forest. If we remove dead trees, we are removing all the nutrients, all the homes, all the habitat from the forest. Also, just please go out and tour these sites. It is disgusting. It is not providing the safety. We need to bury the utility lines. We need to take all the funding that you guys hand back and forth among the agencies that are so in bed with each other in this basin. We need to take all of that funding and directly invest it into our community infrastructure. We cannot afford to do the work. We cannot afford to live here. We cannot afford our insurance rates. Frank Freevault, who has worked in this basin in fire management for so many decades, he said it clearly at the fire thing in Reno last year that we need a paradigm shift. We need to change the way we think about our forests. These are urban conflagrations. This is structure to structure ignition. If you go back and you look at the incident reports from the daily briefings during the Caldor fire, they state clearly that yes, our firefighters worked very hard. They did immense and beautiful work. But if the wind and the weather had not shifted that day, our town would have been lost no matter how much thinning had been conducted in the forest. All the newest science says that thinned forests burn hotter, faster, more extreme than healthy, intact, dense forest. Thank you.
Madam Chair, there are no other hands raised to comment.
Thank you. We will close public comment and I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you all. We're adjourned.